This is a world where there is both a demon king and a hero who opposes him, the one who fights my empire. As for the demon king, he is the true ruler of the demonic realm. The hero gets his powers from this world and uses them for the sole purpose of killing the demon king. On the other hand, the demon king exists to kill the hero. It's a fairly common battle, and everyone is trying to do their part to save the man. Some want to cover for the victor, while others are in the business of saving people. Meanwhile, those who are absolutely obedient to the demon king are known as corps commanders. There are only 12 special corps, from 1 to 12. They are the brutal and powerful subordinates of the demon king. They act with the purpose of destroying everyone. It is said that there is no one who can stand against them. But even demons like them have a hard time dealing with heroes. Not all the power of humans is known to the demon's minions. However, there is an individual who has killed one before, the commander of the Zero Corps, the demon Arutus. His identity as the Demon King's Joker is a trump card. He is also the talent that the man treasures the most. The Demon King sat in the meeting and studied the regulations. The only person who was able to defeat the hero decided to resign. The head of the demons was very angry at such an unexpected turn. All the papers scattered around the room, and the guy continued to stand silently. The man did not understand how this boy dared to try to leave him. The anger inside him was boiling. Finally, the most important knelt down in front of the young boy to beg him not to leave. He couldn't believe the kid was serious, why he was suddenly doing this. It wasn't part of his plan, and he just rolled his eyes. Maybe he didn't like it in the Demon King's castle. There was speculation that his subordinates didn't show him the respect he deserved, discriminated against him because he was human. That can't be true. Demon Art is someone who is undeniably strong despite being human. He possesses an irresistible power that cannot be obtained even by hard work. The boy was someone who is revered and respected by everyone. He is the strongest card a demon has in his hand. But would anyone have the courage to mess with him? Thus, he reported that his subordinates had done nothing wrong. Then, what was the reason? From his facial expression, the man couldn't understand what he was thinking. Could it be that if he didn't give a reason for leaving, he would just be taken and killed? The head of the devils erupted with anger. How could this boy assume such a thing? Why would he say such a thing when he knew how much he was cherished? After all, he just wanted to know why this was happening. Maybe it was because he hadn't been sent abroad lately, or his whole body was itching to fight. In the end, he just wanted the ringleader to calm down so he could explain everything. His mouth was bleeding again, but he only apologized for staining the floor. The man couldn't take it anymore and yelled for the Zero Corps commander's personal doctor to be called. He was really angry when they couldn't find a doctor, but the one arrived in a flash when he heard about the illness. The treatment was immediately started. The demon couldn't wait to find out how his ward was doing. The doctor's name was Ben. As everyone has probably already guessed, it is the consequences from the injury he received in the fight with the hero. But the Demon King didn't call him here to hear what he already knew. Now he needed to find a way to cure him in the shortest possible time, and if he failed, he knew exactly what would happen to him. All Ben had said was that he would do what he could, though that obviously wouldn't be enough. Arutus was asked to continue the conversation another time. The king wanted the boy to return and focus on his recovery. Everyone unhesitatingly accepted the order and began to carry it out. The commander shouted that he was fine, but the doctor was already pulling him towards the chambers. He was placed on a gurney so that he could not walk on his own. At that, rumors spread again that the commander had vomited blood. Frankly, it was surprising that he had only sustained such minor injuries. And after all, he just wanted to retire and live life to the fullest. Such were his perceptions, but everyone just says what they want. Everyone around him was fussing. What if the Lord was feeling sick? His pulse became normal, though, so they put a wet towel on his forehead. After all the manipulations, everyone bowed their heads and asked him to have a good rest. He lay in his bed and thought. It was scary because his name was really Dion Hart. The servant said she would take the bowl with her as soon as he was done drinking. Except that the cup almost fell on her tray, and she had to apologize out of fright. After that, the Lord asked her to leave the room. It was exciting for the girl that their hands came in contact, except that he thought she hated him a lot. It was a bit offensive that she didn't even want her hands to touch his. Compared to that, the Demon King really cared for this boy. The man was worried about the commander walking late while he was still recovering, watching the food, for he needed to recover and eat properly. His concern is too excessive. He is the only human in this demonic realm, born with the weakest body that collapses at the slightest hint of stress. He is mistakenly considered strong, and thus he has become the commander of the Zero Corps, a subordinate of the Demon King. For now, he can chalk it all up to the consequences of his griping with the hero. But should anyone find out, he was simply born with a naturally weak body. All of these things were making him very nervous. It made him furious. The Lord thought he was going to die because he couldn't stay here anymore. His secret might have been revealed, so one must get out of this place at all costs and live a long, carefree life. The only way to accomplish that, get out of the demonic realm. Ed, the assistant commander of Zero Corps, burst into the room. The leader exclaimed upon seeing his comrade. The aide had returned from the human world and immediately rushed to his commander. The kid had gotten a new cube, known as a mirror cube. It was one of the few demons the Lord could feel comfortable around. He would go to the human world and bring trinkets for the kid to play with and dispel boredom, and in doing so, worried a lot about his well-being. He, like the others, believed that his commander had stopped the hero for the sake of saving all the demons. The henchman wanted to find a way to cure him, even if he had to beat up Dr. Ben. From that kind of talk, demons were really scary. After that, he asked his lord to rest properly, to which the latter willingly agreed. There weren't many demons who took care of him like this, so he was grateful to his comrade. The man read his resignation letter. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking with his expressionless face. Although he really was unpredictable from the very first moment they met. Everyone had only seen him supposedly kill the very hero of humanity. It looks like he killed and blocked the hero's self-destruction. I wonder how he's still standing after taking that power upon himself. The Empire sent a pretty interesting guy here. He showed such great bravery and loyalty by jumping into the center of the battlefield for the Empire. The king couldn't believe that they had sent a useful person like him to such a dangerous place. If he were in their shoes, he would never have sent him to such a dangerous place, when lives were at stake. Thus, he was offered to join the Demon King's army. Thinking about it, he became too free after he joined the demons. But after all, the king couldn't send him on a mission. The demon concluded that a meeting of corps commanders should be called to satisfy Arutus. Such a gloating plan had appeared in the man's mind to preserve an ally. Right now, the Lord was very upset because he had lost the chance to rest because of the Demon King's summoning. Did it mean that all the other commanders would be there because he was scared to death of ordinary demons, and there would still be commanders here? Apparently, he was freaking out because of the sudden summoning. Now he had to watch his facial expression. It's best not to mess with them. After all, he wouldn't win if there was any fighting. Everyone began to discuss. Now, rumors were flying around, for some were seeing him for the first time. And some were praising the fact that he was there when he killed the hero, then when the Demon King asked him who he was. And the one supposedly nonchalantly replied that he was the demon Arutus. It was the most sinister name the demon girl had ever heard, and after such a story, she would not be able to forget it. But the Zero Corps commander interrupted them and told them how he had actually introduced himself. They decided to be careful because it seemed that the Lord was in a bad mood. As if he could kill these demons in this fight, he would definitely lose, for he is weak to 100%. Why does it feel like there are more misunderstandings as time goes on, but on the other hand, thanks to that, no one messes with him? If he gets caught, he would immediately die, so he couldn't let anyone know about his secret. He had to act confident, had to act in a way that didn't show fear in front of anyone. All that was left was to get past the guards. The two demons were immediately frightened as soon as they heard that the Zero Corps commander had arrived. With full confidence, he introduced himself and asked them to open the door for him. After that, the Dark King immediately talked about the important thing that the Zero Corps commander had joined them. The swanky plan, according to the king himself, had come true, although the atmosphere in this room was incandescent. Jaikar, the commander of the First Corps, said that Arut should sit next to the Demon King. Asild was the commander of the Third Corps. He was the one who made the kid seem weak, and he couldn't believe that he was that strong. The two were discussing the reasons why their colleague was late. Adelia was the commander of the Fourth Corps, and Velatin of the Sixth. Ririnel was angry at the muscle group for showing disrespect for Arutus's appearance. She was the commander of the 11th Corps. It was incomprehensible why so many Corps commanders were gathered here. It was so scary that he wanted to go back to his room. The Demon King immediately asked about his well-being, and asked him not to worry about being late, because it wasn't on purpose. Although he was late simply because he didn't want to come, and the waiter already wanted to pour him a drink. The soy rabbit was getting shafted by the fact that his glass was filling up. When there are meetings in the demonic realm, you can drink expensive alcohol as much as you want. That was the only reason he was here. Except it wasn't alcohol, it was just grape juice. Everyone was watching their colleague closely to get the gist of his behavior. After all, the meeting was only in honor of this young boy. The flavor of this drink was quite strange, though it was similar to alcohol. Perhaps this was how he was being discriminated against, or care for his health, which was done by the Demon King's personal order because of such a strong love for alcohol. The Lord really didn't understand why only he was treated this way. Was he really trying to save money on alcohol because he discovered how useless it was? This made his heart beat more frequently. Suddenly, they were all gathered here just to kill him. The demon asked to hear him out before getting angry, because he was the reason he had called this meeting. There was an order for the commander of the 6th Corps to share the details of the document he had provided, although the 12th Corps was still defending the village. Their numbers had increased, so they could no longer handle the heroes. They evacuated the remaining residents to a large walled city. However, they don't know when there will be an ambush there, so they need more reinforcements to hunt down the demonic monsters. He wondered why the commander of the 12th Corps was missing. Maybe he was killed. They made such a fuss, although the Lord himself could understand their surprise. Demonic monsters, among the demons that the king had created. They were creatures loyal only to their instincts and desires, failed products. No one could believe that one of the commanders had lost to these demonic monsters. But what did it have to do with the Lord? The demons fought every day because the monsters were too many. They didn't know the reason for their sudden increase in numbers. The now deceased hero was killing these monsters back then, and it was no wonder he was killed. Everyone immediately thought of Arutus, who had killed the hero. Somehow the boy thought they were going to kill him using that as an excuse. Besides, he didn't kill the hero. Wasn't the Demon King the one who tried to kill him in the first place? The boy waited to see what the Lord himself had to say to that. He asked not to worry, and said that the Zero Corps would be sent as reinforcements. What news was too unexpected for this little lord? The demon Roll rejoiced in his fine work, and wished that his ward would go there and relieve his stress. One of his colleagues thought that he was sent there, as if he was just there to patrol the neighborhood. So he believed that the Demon King believed that supposedly the commander of the Zero Corps would be able to do what the commander of the 12th Corps couldn't do. Just how powerful he was for the head to trust him like that. His body was beyond perfect, so he didn't want to be forced to go there. The other comrades noticed that the little guy didn't want to go. Jakar thought he would make excuses and say he didn't want to go after hearing the report, but he probably suppressed the urge to rage within himself, calmly assessing the state of his body. Although the others still didn't trust him, but he really acts like a great commander. Not only is he strong, able to make good judgments, his desire to fight him grows even stronger. The man didn't ask to exert himself. It's just to take command of Zero Corps and relieve the tension in this village. It was definitely a daunting task for him. There was no way the Lord wanted to go there. It was unacceptable to voice such thoughts. In that case, he didn't care if the Demon King allowed it, but he would definitely escape. So, despite all his fear, he said he would go there. After all, it was necessary to get out of the cursed Demon Kingdom somehow. That day had come for him after all, since he had been trying to escape. It was only getting closer. Things were being packed rather quickly. Even though the Devil King was apologizing for sending him out so late, he showed with his whole appearance that he was very eager to go there. After all, he couldn't tell his lord that he was running away to the Empire, although of course, it wouldn't be that easy even if he went there, but there was no other choice left. A crazy emperor who sent him to the Demon King himself, and a brother who hated him to death. But apparently, it was better than instant death among monsters. No, this boy had better start thinking positively after all. That way he would at least have a chance to stay alive and live the life he wanted. The warriors had discussed that the Zero Corps, as well as its leader, were very competent, so they were sure they could just sneak out after playing their part, and they would take care of the rest. They would be arriving at the village soon. They needed to stay in their ranks and keep their guard up. Those were the rules with their team. Only, would there be a reason for him to intervene? After all, even the Overlord had said that he didn't need to overdo it. Now that he had stopped worrying, it was time to enjoy some solitude. In his hands was a special wine of the Demon Realm, a rare drink that is only made there. It has an exquisite flavor, so it is loved by many people. Last time, he was unable to drink the wine because of his leader during the summoning. However, they are mistaken if they think he can't drink it now. They say that this wine is so fine that one can go to the other world from enjoying it. Therefore, he should at least taste it before he dies. They definitely made the best booze there. After one sip, he finally felt alive. The taste couldn't be compared to anything else. The Lord's platoon noticed that their chief was preoccupied. Even the curtains in his wagon were drawn. This seemed rather strange to them. Perhaps the Lord, still not feeling well. Maybe it was because of that incident before they left, they were starting to worry. Before he got into the carriage, he was called out. The other demon thought that the gentleman wanted to go on horseback, but he should have thought about his health and went in the carriage. But the captain himself did not understand what they were talking about, because he himself wanted to ride in a carriage. For him, a ride on horseback would be like meeting a ferocious beast. Deputy Arutha just wanted to look into the carriage. It was done out of interest, though he was yanked back as if he wanted to break some rules. Ed could tell it was because he had served Sir Arutus for a long time, and thought the man was very eager to ride a horse. Since he regularly suppressed many of his desires, the aide wanted to tell him that he should do what he wanted. But the king's orders were also for the welfare of his superior. One of the warriors shouted to the lieutenant that a village was already visible ahead. They reached their destination rather quickly, except that the entire village was already ablaze with fire. By the time they reached it, there would be no trace of it, not only of the inhabitants, but also of the buildings themselves. The poor people of the village were lying breathless on the ground. It was horrible to look at. Many demonic monsters had already scoured the area and left, but the assistant was sure that they couldn't escape far. Therefore, they should have gone in pursuit of them now. He gave the order to the servants. Only, all sorts of monsters were already on their way. Not only were they dangerous in their own right, they were holding makeshift weapons in their hands. They were already waiting for them at the entrance. Everyone needed to prepare for battle. The danger had caught up with them as soon as they arrived, so they had to act quickly. Arut's aide shouted to everyone to fight for him, because everything depended on the ordinary warriors. Even though they had arrived with the supposedly strongest, there was no help to be expected from him. Everyone rushed to attack their enemies. No one knew how this battle would end, but everyone was ready to give their lives for victory. Everyone used the weapons that belonged to them. They were trained and had the skills to be good fighters. The entire battle took place in a fire situation. Everyone was in different locations, and the smoke prevented them from seeing the danger in front of them. The lieutenant noticed something was amiss. Their army was quite strong, but they couldn't completely exterminate all the monsters. Still, there was no end in sight to their opponents. Ed himself was a desperate man who never gave up. Battles were an integral part of his life. He was shouted at for danger. He seemed to have let his guard down because the most enormous monster was already looming over him. It was worth it to be careful. In the castle at this time, another meeting was taking place. His Majesty was being asked if only a zero core would be enough in the battle against the demonic monsters. Since their numbers were quite high, shouldn't they have sent reinforcements? Jaikar didn't want them to lose even more civilians. Except that the leader himself guaranteed that everything was fine, because to him, the zero core was very strong. Only in reality, things weren't so rosy. Besides, even if they were to face real danger, they had a real winner. That was exactly what the most important demon thought. Only no one wanted to remember that he was the most ordinary person who hadn't even undergone their special training. But staying on the sidelines was impossible. Out of his hiding place came their commander. Of course, Ed was scared, but also grateful for his rescue. There was no way they could just stand in one place. The deputy exclaimed because he was scared. He still had to make sure his favorite supervisor was okay. He wanted to thank him and was about to ask for help. But in front of his face, there was a dagger point that was already covered in blood. Dion Hart stood in front of his comrade. He held his sword in front of him and asked a question that didn't need to be answered. Apparently, they were now enemies. Thoughts arose that it might have been because of Sir Arudis's addiction to alcohol. It looked like he was really drunk right now. Is that where he got the bottle from? In another moment, he turned around and considered that meant his enemy was behind him. Only under the influence of alcohol he was not thinking clearly, and realized only now how bad it was. Huge flashes flashed between the man and his enemy. This monster was large enough to fight him alone. All that was left was to hope for rescue. His lieutenant was very worried that he was about to lose his friend. Even though he was considered strong, he, as his significant other, was worried. There was a need for action. Eventually, he found himself crashing near the rocks. After all, it was this monster that turned out to be his enemy, who easily dealt him deadly blows. Only under the influence of such delicious wine did he decide to continue his fight. He had enough strength to get up and continue fighting the monsters. He was completely absorbed in this madness. As soon as the monsters did not end, one after another, new enemies were coming. His consciousness was only enough to distinguish the enemy. Although he thought he was weak, his gaze was completely saturated with the rage that would move him at this moment. Everyone looked at their commander with a lasting impression. Everyone had finally seen what this boy was like in action, and were pleasantly surprised. His goal was to not leave a single intact corpse. Even if the enemy seemed dead, one could not stop striking. There was a lot of anger lurking in this character. He continued to kill his enemies with greed. Every blow and blood splatter gave him pleasure. Off he went like a true madman. So he continued to instill fear in his enemies. Even the very monsters weren't coming at the same speed as before. They were stopped by the instinct of self-preservation. That's how he and his weak body managed to survive in this world. He showed me his best human qualities, so he was easily accepted by the demons. In another realm, one of the employees was reporting to his king about a rumor that was going around the area. It was about the commander of the Zero Corps. The soldier sent to investigate the demon realm reported that he was the one involved in the subjugation this time. This person was extremely strong and cruel as the rumors said. Therefore, he was the most valuable talent for the Theme King. On the throne sat the Emperor Eduardo de Serte. Vitia's stories made him miss someone. If they wanted to leave the demon realm in this way, they should also prepare themselves. Also, His Majesty had the perfect candidate for that. So this young lad should have just agreed to such an offer, to get the opportunity to succeed. The boy bowed his head even lower and accepted the royal decree. He had no right to oppose or voice his displeasure. What remained was to make this ward as talented as he was. The Emperor had many ideas in his head that he urgently wanted to fulfill. Once upon a time, an 8-year battle lasted. For the glory of the Empire, this place was drenched in blood. Everywhere, swords of fallen warriors were stuck into the ground. Among them, a young man stood with the noble sacrifice of the vanguard at the forefront, the only one who could still breathe or even just stand on his feet. Thus, he considered all the dead as meat shields left behind by the Empire. It wasn't pleasant to look at, but one had to deal with one's own problems. It was a living hell. Everyone was fighting not for life, but for death. No one knew where it would lead, but at the same time, they were not going to stop. The boy didn't want to get into this hell to risk his life fighting. He didn't want to lose his youth and old age to some empire. He had absolutely no intentions. He was just running away from ridiculous fights every time. He only wanted to live a calm and measured life. The desperate hero was doing everything he could to survive. He was clearly not the kind of person who was going to sacrifice himself for anyone. That's why he became quite cruel. He refused to die for someone else's wishes. He chose to survive no matter what. Continuing to call his body weak, he killed anyone who stood in his way. And after that, his only desire was revenge. All of his suffering was because of the place he was born in. All of this was desperately fixed in his memory. After all those nightmares, he woke up. And after waking up, he didn't realize what he saw, but it seemed to be something meaningful. The room seemed familiar, but he still couldn't understand what had happened. Everything around him was strange and incomprehensible. How much time had passed, and after what events? The doctor, along with his assistant, were glad that the man had finally woken up after sleeping for a full 24 hours. While he slept, they managed to finish the treatment, but does he know how shocked the doctor was when he came back covered in blood? The extermination of the demonic monsters was successful. They all ran away in fear. They returned to the Demon King's castle to treat the commander after he fell. The Lord closed his eyes and began to apologize. He wanted to be just a little stronger to help his own. But then he came back to his senses because the mission had been a success, which meant he had won. Ben thought he had temporary amnesia. That's a pretty serious injury since he can't remember. He was hit by a demonic beast, but he got up right away, so he didn't pay much attention to it. The kid had no way of understanding what had actually happened. All explanations were based on what was seen from the outside. Only his feelings he did not remember. Fear came in a huge wave. Memories one after another popped into his head. It could only mean one thing. He'd gotten drunk and made a mess of things. In fact, he had drunk too much, so he had passed out. And it wasn't because of the injury. He had probably fought too hard. He shouldn't have fooled around when he was drunk. The doctor heard that his corps had completed their mission without a single casualty. There were so many monsters that it seemed unbelievable. The young man tried to say he did nothing, but he was only called humble. But he believed that he had seriously done nothing, and everything was taken care of by the warriors from the corps. Sir apologized to his comrade Ed for interfering and being a total liability. It wasn't like that at all. The aide thought that Arudis was brilliant, and that he would defeat the numbered monsters at the front and was a role model as a commander. True, the doctor thought that the boy had overdone it this time, although they know that he is strong, but due to the effects of the battle with the hero, his body was quite weak. The man sadly asked him to be more careful. They reminded him once again that he could trust them completely. Arit himself couldn't still believe that he had defeated everyone by himself. Ed once again wanted to remind them that they live for the commander. They would definitely become stronger, then he could trust them and rest easy. There was too much pressure from the outside. It was making him crazy. The young man had no idea what they were talking about, for he had no powers. Everything was unimportant, for he just didn't want to know anything, only to be left alone as soon as possible. Just at that moment, the other corps commanders burst into his chambers. They had been told that their colleague was awake. Adelia looked anxiously toward the little man, about whom more rumors would now be spread. Asild shouted loudly for the girl to be quiet because their boy was still coming around. It seemed like a very strange concern on his part. The couple ended up starting an argument right in front of their friend, but they both came to pay their respects to the Zero Corps commander. But were they really that close? Jaikar wasn't shy either, and decided to stop by to visit the young man. His friends were still the same, so there was no point in being ashamed of them anymore. If they came to visit, they should have quietly greeted and left. After all, it made their comrade uncomfortable. They should have thought of this earlier. They decided to apologize to the person they had come to see. The little lord was fed up with it all, because his real plan had not come true. In his head, he had a great plan of yelling for them all to get the hell out of here. That way he wouldn't be able to get rid of them. It would be too dangerous for his life. The man worried that his comrade was very sensitive, having just returned from a mission, and the man was careless. The first corps leader understood their feelings, but asked them to refrain from fighting and make sure they didn't kill each other. It would only be a miracle for the boy to even touch such a large and pumped-up demon. The speech of killing him couldn't even appear in his mind. He decided that he should teach them to feel sorry for their opponents, for the sake of the future of himself. Maybe it would keep himself alive if something went wrong. They would spare his life if they realized how weak he was. Each of his new plans was more interesting than the last, except it was just as stupid. He said afterward that he was angry, but he should have spoken with care. His voice shouldn't shake or show his fear. There was no point in punishing someone just because the Lord was angry. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to show some mercy. He tried to explain what leniency was for those who were weaker. He had high hopes that it would work. He wanted them to remember this lesson well and be sure to spare him some mercy in the near future. These two just agreed and decided to keep it in mind. The atmosphere in this room was quite strange. No one understood this man's behavior. It didn't seem to sound very nice and cute and was more like a sermon. Now they were perceiving him in a completely different way. The man thought his coworker was scary, even when he was forgiving. Anyway, he heard that the one had successfully completed his task, so he must have tried very hard. All over the castle, he was the only one being talked about. The girl smiled and relayed that he had single-handedly destroyed half of the monsters. It was unbelievable. They were scared to hear that he had done such an act. To him, it was all just some ridiculous rumor. He didn't even know how to fight. At this rate, he'd be passing off other people's accomplishments as his own. But apparently, these demons knew far more about him than he knew about himself. Unfortunately, he didn't realize that. The other man had heard tales of his heroism as well. That was why he had come by to ask him for a favor. It was quite interesting what this intimidating demon would offer now. Despite his broad smile, one could see that this conversation seemed ominous. Therefore, the young man only queried what kind of favor he was talking about. After he had fully recovered, could his colleague ask to spar with him? For the boy, it was a straight path to the graveyard. It's not just a duel with a mere demon. It's a sparring match between him and the commander of the Third Corps, controlling the Demon King's elite guards. And he is an ordinary human. For Arudis, this was a real shock. He had always tried to avoid clashes with demons, but here, one of them himself had offered to fight. Since he had often heard about its greatness, he would very much like to be mentored. Therefore, this sparring was much needed for the leader. Thinking about it, Jaikar remembered that the Zero Corps commander had never had a sparring session since he became the chief, so he too would like to see his skill level. He wondered if he would take him up on that offer. It would be a joy for the woman to see this battle. The Fourth Corps was in the information business, so she was going to gather as many spectators as possible. The man didn't care who came, just as long as they didn't get in the way. The boy had all the eyes of these demons on him. Right now, he didn't even have a chance to say no to his co-workers. It was necessary to get out of this situation somehow. It frightened him that they were in fact deciding everything on their own right now, but it didn't make any sense to him. It was a shame he hadn't been able to escape much sooner. He would blow that boy into a million pieces with a punch of his hand. He envisioned Asild as his most intimidating opponent and feared him. Afterward, he decided to say that it would be quite difficult to accept the offer. After all, he still hadn't recovered from the battle with the monsters, and it seemed his strength wouldn't allow him to survive. Even this man realized that he was avoiding the battle, except that he didn't understand why at all. After all, right now, it was hard to imagine that he was actually scared. Just look at those suspicious eyes, and it seemed that he would not be able to get away with empty excuses. Except that their conversation was interrupted. The man decided that this commander was really worried about his opponents. He had always wondered why he didn't participate in sparring, but now he understood. This was a good chance to get rid of this offer. They looked amongst themselves, each with different questions. That demon cried out, "Is this really the truth?" In fact, it really hurt his self-esteem because he didn't consider himself the weakest at all. The heroes were actually frightened by such an onslaught. It was believed that it was because of Asild that he had rejected the offer of sparring. Besides, not much time had passed since his last battle, so it would be harder for him to restrain himself in battle. Now this man was determined. Once the sparring started, it wouldn't end until one of them died. For the sake of this battle, he was willing to sacrifice his life, since his opponent was completely confident in his victory. Although he, for one, had always learned that he could fight as an equal against any other commander, he had never considered himself a clear winner. What kind of crazy confidence was in this kid? A real talent that the Demon King recognized, except that he himself doesn't believe in his own power. No matter how much it frustrates him, he can't guarantee his victory or say with certainty that he won't die. In the end, he doesn't have the spirit to fight Arudis to the death. Although it hurt his pride a bit, he was thankful for the answer. With special respect, he bowed low as he spoke words of forgiveness. In the end, he surrendered like that. The man himself was even a little surprised at this outcome, though he himself had remained silent all this time. But maybe it was for the best. As expected for Ed, his superior was incredible. Cold-blooded and fierce commanders treated him with a respect that was rare. He didn't understand why things happened this way, but he didn't think it was that simple. There was clearly some hidden meaning here that would have to be dealt with later. The demon hadn't completely given up yet. When he had built up enough strength and confidence to know he wouldn't die, he would ask to spar again. His gaze was full of determination. The boy whimpered and wished that his enemy would finally give up already. All these games had already tortured him enough, though he just wished he could live a quiet and measured life. Ever since Asild had made his promise to Sir Arthur, he had felt a strong inspiration. Such a man clearly lacked adventure in his life. The poor boy couldn't stop his opponent, and he was already running to train so that he could get a chance to fight his opponent as soon as possible. Everyone just stared at the departing comrade. Yes, he left too quickly with the phantom hope of a fight to come. No one saw him again. He had no ambition for further advancement, but everyone thought that thanks to the man, he had gotten his wish. Though he behaved rather loudly and drove the boy crazy. Such overwhelming events caused him to grab his head, so his henchman was afraid he was running a fever again. It was worth getting more rest. The desperate guy apologized to everyone and said that his supervisor needed to rest, so they should have all left that room. That was it. They apologized for that and hoped that he would get better soon. After saying goodbye, they said they would be leaving. But all that was going through this young man's mind right now was a way to escape from the Demon Kingdom. The doctor immediately handed over a glass of water to help his patient. But that was not the end of his turmoil today. Jaikar lastly decided to ask to fight him as well when he finally recovered. The man was looking forward to it, which dumbfounded everyone present. He wished he could get rid of everyone in his chambers sooner rather than later. He ended up just collapsing on his bed and continuing to think about escape. The doctor noticed his heart was beating too fast. He should have calmed down now. He had been pretty exhausted lately. He had managed to get out of there somehow, but what was there to do next? With his hand, he leaned against the shutters and began to ponder with his head down. Except that his assistant happily decided that the chief needed to meet the members of Zero Corps as soon as possible. Everyone was waiting for him. The doctor, meanwhile, felt that if he stayed in his room, he would never get better. If he wanted to get better, he needed moderate exercise. He was dizzy from all the events that had happened in just one day. So much had come upon a man who wasn't even sure of his own abilities. All he wanted was for everyone else to leave him alone. He got angry and started kicking things with his foot, wanting to destroy everything around him. The other demons heard the noise. It sent them into a momentary rage. Now they were wondering who had decided to disturb their evening peace. Now he realized he was in for a bad time. The thing he'd shoved had gone in a completely different direction. He'd have to apologize profusely, except they bowed in return and saluted the Zero Corps commander. They had already apologized themselves for causing trouble. They wanted to teach this guy who was blocking their path, being only a lesser incubus, a lesson. They would take care of it and try not to get in anyone's way. The Lord had heard that incubi are the lowest rank in the demon realm, so that meant they were clutching and bullying the poor young man. He looked all innocent and scared. The demons were a bit frightened by the sight of their boss and decided that they had better just leave. It was obvious from the look on his face that he wasn't in the best of moods right now. It was a good thing for him that these monsters had fled on their own, although he had no idea why. What remained to be decided was what to do with this child. This was the first time he had ever looked at a demon weaker than him. Now was a good time to think about his safety. For now, one of the problems had evaporated. The other was already standing in front of him and needed to be quiet. The kid was startled by that look. He had heard that normally the commander was quiet, but when in anger was known to be more violent than any other. He was sure that his presence had disturbed Arutus. This time the child had definitely decided that he might die, except that the leader himself decided to offer his hand and asked if he could help the boy up from the floor. He asked the incubus not to be frightened because those villains had already left. Of course, he had no idea that he was also considered quite evil and dangerous in this castle. It was noticeable that his eyes were not looking at the child with disgust, but with genuine benevolence. It was quite surprising for such a young demon. It had been a long time since he had been treated with such kindness. He wondered if someone like him was not disgusted by the fact that he would be in physical contact with him. The only answer to that question was an immediate squeeze of his hand. He pulled it towards him because he didn't see anything wrong with it. If he thought that, then as a person he must be disgusting to them as well. Saying that made him sob a little. He couldn't even dare to think about it, let alone say it to his face. They agreed that they both respected each other. The boy was also trying to survive in this harsh demon realm. They should have helped each other. He was so happy now because he had never been treated with such kindness, so he tried to thank as much as he could. It would be with great pleasure that he would repay him, and for that, he would need some free time. Gratitude would not be long in coming. It was only worth it to agree. This frightened the man himself a little. For him, there was a feeling that he had gotten involved in something very unnecessary. Perhaps this, his gut feeling, would prove to be correct. At this time, the king of this kingdom came into his room. The man wanted to know how his best warrior was feeling, but he couldn't figure out where he had gone. It was unlikely that he had anything to do right now. That's why he decided to agree, even though he knew that this idea was not quite right. As a thank you, he would like to give him a tour of the garden, as well as some herbs that were great for relieving fatigue. There was nothing criminal about it. Since everyone knows that such a commander is really busy, the boy would certainly understand if he was refused now. At his master, he looked at him fearfully. It really surprised him that the Demon King's castle had a garden. How in such a dull and horrible castle there was something beautiful. It was quite interesting. The young man apologized for not introducing himself. His name was Gien, and he was a gardener, one who took care of all the plants, beyond the boundaries they were in. Even in the demon realm there was something interesting, and this boy looked like a good man. A garden was a place with beautiful colors and greenery, and fresh air as well. Wasn't that the kind of place he just needed right now? It all sounded like the perfect place to calm his nerves. Could he ask to accompany him? That was great news for the gardener. At last, they came to the place they called a garden here. Everything around was strewn with red roses that grew even on the ceiling. It was indeed a beautiful garden, and the Lord looked at it all with great admiration. They were both happy being here and now. There was a refreshing scent of greenery all around. The fresh air was really what he needed right now, and he was fully beginning to enjoy it. One of the huge plants wanted to attack this man to eat something exotic. The gardener tried to calm his plant and asked it not to attack such a dear guest, and the man was scared out of his wits. Incubus had to apologize to his manager. He thought that the flower wanted to show by this his happiness from visiting him. All the dreams were dispelled to ashes. This kid turned out to be abnormal too, so he should not be considered weaker than himself. In fact, this garden only looked normal from the outside, but such scary plants were all over the inside. We had to get out of here quickly. I had to tell him that some urgent matters had come up and he had to go. The kid was upset because there were better plants inside. Now he would have to visit the Zero Body on the training ground since he had been gone for a long time. He felt he should see them immediately. The boy noticed that this lord had left in such a hurry. He must have really been busy. He shouldn't have gotten too upset. After that, the gardener spoke to the plants and asked if he was sorry to see him go too. It remained to be seen if they would see him again. He decided that he should meet him again and give him the gift. He should be given the most beautiful plant from the garden, and then he could become even closer. Well, he still had goosebumps. It was silly to think that there was anyone normal in the Demon King's castle. His room was the best because everywhere else was dangerous, even though he had used the excuse to escape from the garden. But now he really needed to check on his team. After all, he had caused chaos while drunk, and it was a shame not to apologize. Since he was already out, he should at least show his face. Compared to what he had just seen, the core members were nothing, except that when he entered the training room, he found that it was empty. Since there was no one here, he had better go back. There wasn't even a place to sit down and wait. It didn't seem like anything would be solved if he avoided them, and he was curious just how strong this core was. They used wooden balls for practice. He was beyond excited during the destruction of the monsters, but doesn't remember anything. Figures it was a good opportunity to test himself. Except this training ball was quite heavy, and he couldn't hold it up to his weight. It was better that no one saw it. Even on the battlefield, he could barely lift a wooden sword, let alone an iron sword. Thus, he should just use his dagger and not show off. In a most unexpected moment, his team came into this hall. They were also astonished to see their commander. He had hoped they hadn't seen him, except that to them, he looked like a real hero. None of them now even doubted that this man was really strong and could defeat Love. In the end, the whole team with glee started asking how the man was feeling. He hadn't checked in for a long time, and they were starting to worry. But now they just took a break. They also remembered that in the last fight, their leader was awesome. I had to calm them down and tell them to relax, so they yelled. They still thought he looked tired, even though he always says he's fine. He had really overdone it last time, though, and now they would defend him to the end. It was incomprehensible to him why they were all looking at him like that. Best case scenario was to just call it a day and get out of here. Although he had planned to go in right after the mission, he couldn't due to other circumstances, so he apologized. He had to say that they did a good job on the mission. His method of training was negligent, and he gave them the appropriate amount of encouragement. Once they started practicing, he would sit down to observe. He felt like his legs were starting to fail, and if he fell, it would be embarrassing. But in fact, one of those standing around had decided that this guy should die today, except that in order not to burn with shame, he was able to dodge this attack and stand up. This really startled the attacker, and he immediately started asking questions. That is, it only now came to him that this was a real attack. This was dangerous for him. He should have run away from here. From the intense fear, he didn't notice how he got his elbow right in the face of his enemy. It was very unexpected for him, but there was nothing he could do. As a result, his opponent ended up on the floor with a broken face. The man himself stood with the ball in his hands and was scared, although the enemy himself even managed to swear. Now the boy noticed that this gentleman's face was similar to a human's. I wonder how he could be here and why he came to kill him. Where did the man come from in the Demon King's castle? The battered man was still sitting on the floor, and the hero looked up at him. The situation was depressing. The warriors decided that if even their commander didn't know him, it must be an intruder. Of course, the first thing they wanted to do was make sure their superior was okay. Except it was time for this stranger to get out of here, lest he end up dead. But would he have time to do so under the circumstances? To his dismay, the Lord had already taken the ball to the top. It looked like he was caught up now. A heavy punishment, and death was closer than he himself had realized. Leaving such an uninvited guest here was quite dangerous. It was necessary to stun him further to find out where he came from. Then they could have been followed. The young man's wrist was sore after holding the heavy weapon. This incident was reported to His Majesty, and he asked that the man be locked up. Everyone stood puzzled, but agreed to the order. After this incident, the young youth decided to leave this training hall. Today, nothing good happened to him. The demons felt that their leader was disappointed in them. They are sure that they allowed the intruder to enter the training ground, but he was the one who caught the culprit. One of them noticed that all of the Lord's movements were so fast and smooth, even though he wasn't ready for this fight. Sir Arut, who seemed to be leisurely strolling, dodged the assassination attempt with unimaginable speed and even struck back. How could an ordinary warrior do such a thing? Plus, he caught the intruder as he tried to escape and instantly ended the entire situation. This was no mere luck for them. The Zero Corps commander's authority was so great that his presence overshadowed all the other corps members. This could not be doubted now. This fighter had trained hard to be recognized, but his commander's skills are beyond his expectations. They weren't even worthy of being his toes. There was no time to waste, and now they would all start their training together to get even a little closer to the best results. Everyone agreed. They would train until they were useful to their master. Therefore, all of their training would be without rest, starting today. Although the boy himself decided that he had overdone something when he lifted the wooden sword. Now his wrist was very sore. He didn't even think about what his actions were leading to. Well, now that he had all the annoying errands done for the day, he could go rest in his room. That was the best decision he had made. He ended up getting a very good night's sleep. Perhaps the sun was still just rising and he couldn't open his eyes, so he asked what time it was. By now, the head of this castle himself was already sitting in his room. He believed that his favorite student was very tired because he slept like a dead man. It seemed to the boy that he was sleeping now, but it was not a dream at all. What had the leader of all the demons of this realm forgotten in this place? The man apologized for bothering right after waking up, but wouldn't God his boy take a little time? He couldn't wait to discuss everything. What was the matter? It wasn't like there hadn't been a problem lately. He didn't care though. He generally didn't want to hear anything, but since his king had come himself, maybe it was urgent. Then he remembered that he had caught an intruder yesterday. Maybe that was it, he exclaimed immediately. Except why come so early in the morning because of that? He definitely had the right idea. Then why not walk along with his emperor to begin with? He definitely had something to show. They were going down to the dungeon. The criminal should be locked up here, so why did he bring him here? Is it possible that the stranger said you strange things about him? Or is he seriously going to use the boy to set an example? There was a lot of blood and breathless bodies around. Their new enemy was sitting on his knees near the wall. This man had suffered many injuries. His face was swollen with abrasions and blood was all over his body and clothes, but he still continued to stare viciously. Arudis was greatly frightened by such a mess. What had happened here in just one night? It was quite unpleasant to look at it all. The leader grabbed the stranger by the hair and ordered him to look at him. He asked if this man looked familiar to the Lord. What did he mean by that? The incredible power he possesses is capable of eliminating demons. Even though he is a human, there was a noticeable, ever-increasing strength. When talking about the Demon King, a character facing death during a battle with the leader must choose between two possibilities. The first is to self-destruct, causing massive damage to his nearby opponent. The second is to sacrifice his life to spread his power across the continent, creating hero shards. Most heroes choose the second option in fear of their powers disappearing. The Empire has been spinning those who carry these fragments. Unofficially, all people who possessed fragments were called heroes. But officially, only those who proved themselves worthy through exceptional accomplishments were dubbed hero, and given glory that could not be measured. Well, this was done to use them at will, but it wasn't even ridiculous to send heroes to the demon world. But for the king himself, it was already calling him a hero candidate, then a hero himself, or better yet, a remnant. It gave him a sense of satisfaction. And he was right. If it was officially recognized by the Empire, the savior wouldn't be so weak, but he was still considered a hero. It was wasteful to consider him a bargaining chip. They couldn't send out hero candidates without an obvious reason. What on earth were you thinking, Emperor, at that moment? It seems a new war was brewing. The little lord decided to address His Majesty, and immediately turned his attention to him and asked him what was troubling him. He was willing to do anything for him. With special respect, he asked to be allowed to speak to the man face to face. That way, he could elicit more useful information for himself. Without much conversation, the leader said he would wait at the entrance, and the man promised to be brief, so as not to linger here long. There was no message. His purpose was just this man, but what was the real reason? What was he even thinking, finding himself among so many demons? The stranger had called the young man by his real name while saying that he was a traitor. He seemed to know a lot more about him. He said that he had earned the Emperor's trust and became a hero of the Empire, but still betrayed the Empire and defected to the side of the Demon Kingdom. The one laughed, and never in his life would have thought that he would deliver messages in such a way. To the one who arrived, this reaction was rather incomprehensible. He was still amused and asked if he was a bargaining chip. The situation was quite interesting to him, and he wanted to know more details. Thoth got angry and started yelling that he had received an important assignment to take down a traitor from His Majesty, except that Sammy was caught looking like a hook. The kid became furious again and said that the truth was that the fool had called him a traitor. At such moments, there always arose in him an irresistible desire to kill. What sins had this man committed since he had become abandoned by the Emperor himself? The henchmen of the Empire had yet to realize that he could be literally abandoned. It was because His Majesty knew everything. The commander placed his hands on this man's shoulders and continued to tell him that no one else wanted him. The reason why this man was in the demon realm was his purpose. And now he knew that the Emperor understood his actions and that this was a true escape. That was why His Majesty would send him here, to the dangerous world of the demon realm, to kill a traitor. Thus, he had truly gotten rid of that boy. Well, now he should have thought it over carefully before his death. Although he now realized that he had sacrificed everything for the Empire, he had been repaid in a completely different way. The abandoned warrior began to insult his emperor and decided that he would not forgive him. But he also wished to kill this traitor no matter what. Dionheart, even frustrated no loyalty was in him, only wasted his time on something completely useless. The king was already waiting for him at the exit. Judging by the look on his face, he had satisfied his curiosity. But the answers were not interesting at all. Now it remained to decide what to do with this stranger. It was not even possible to kill him, but to use him for his own purposes. So he asked his favorite. The hero replied that it all depended on His Majesty, but he believed that the best solution would be to simply kill him. Not a shred of pity remained in him. The demon asked if that would be his final verdict. Though it didn't matter, he would take care of it. But in return, he asked for one favor. The first corps requested immediate support. They relayed that this was not a hero candidate. There was an actual hero that was taking part in the fight on the front lines. This caused the young man's displeasure. He didn't want to return to the battlefield again because it brought him nothing but frustration. As he probably already knew, a hero and demons don't get along well. If the hero who showed up on the front lines, not a few used discarded Empire fragments, but a real hero, then the regular demons were no match for him. He was more than sure that his boy was interested in this. What were the Emperor's intentions? That he had sent a shard, along with a real hero, so he needed to take good care of this mission. Now, all he had to do was prepare for departure, so it was time for them to get out of here. Right now, he was in a state of confusion. Right now, he was terribly scared, because he was going to real hell. He couldn't resist this order because he could be killed on this very spot. After a quick assembly, the carriage was already waiting for its commander. Once again, his actions didn't have the consequences he expected. His memories were of going to the dungeon, but when he regained consciousness, he is once again sent to some crazy, dangerous place. He keeps passing out, and each time he feels like he's going crazy. The only thing he can remember is that the stranger is going to die. And then he was ordered to go to the front lines. All preparations for departure were now complete. The report had been accepted, and also the appearance of the new hero was taking him completely astray. He was coming down the stairs to get into his transportation. Since he was going to be traveling, he could afford to take a look at this new hero, could at least reassure himself. After all, it really was interesting to him. The aide knew that his commander had quenched his thirst by going on a monster subjugation mission. But he was sure it wasn't enough for him to calm down at all. Some people had heard that the front lines were quite deplorable, but looking at Sir Arudis, one would think that he was going on a vacation. Up above, the commander of the 11th Corps, Reincarnation, appeared. She called out to her colleague and said that she missed him very much. That was unexpected. She came down to them and was asked what she was doing. Despite her cute appearance, she possesses the strongest demonic energy, second only to the Demon King. One couldn't let appearances fool one's self. She heard that he was going to the front line, so she wanted to give this to him. The necklace with the pink glowing stone. What was it for? It looked extremely suspicious. So why did she decide to give it to him? Maybe he needed to trust his gut this time and not take such things with him. It had a protection spell on it, so it would be able to help keep him from dying at least once. It wasn't that important, but she wanted to be of help to him. After saying that, he grabbed the item without thinking long and thanked her. The girl gave this necklace to him. Of course, he had to accept the gift. What reason could there be to refuse it? That's how quickly he changed his mind. Without even realizing it himself, he had lost control. His gratitude consisted of ruffling this girl's hair. She was smiling. That adorable moving thing? Maybe a ribbon? Unlikely though, more like tentacles, but very nice. But Reincarnation didn't look like she disliked anything, so it was safe to be calm. Ed bowed in thanks. The man knew that Sir Arudis was strong, but he was still worried in case the aftermath would make itself felt again. Now, however, thanks to such a necklace, he would be able to exhale. The demoness was embarrassed because this boy cared so much about his commander, so it was just adorable. The lieutenant should continue to serve such a person with the same attitude. He could definitely be relied on in this matter. The boy himself didn't like the way they cooed. The frightened assistant immediately wanted to see his superior off. Subsequently, he earned after killing the hero who, to be honest, he didn't kill. Didn't stop him when he was about to kill himself with an explosion, nor did he absorb the blast wave. All the time, he was just a comrade for the hero. When they lost a lot of people on the way here, it was a hard time in the life of the Empire. The hero at that time asked Dion Hart to stay here because he wanted to finish this battle together with the Imperial soldiers. He had already done enough at that time, but his presence would be an indispensable support for this hero. Since this Demon King, known as the strongest in history, who couldn't guarantee their survival, they needed someone to report to the Empire the results of this battle, and he would want Sir Hart to do that. So now he had to get back. There was something he needed to do while he was alive, and he decided to give him that opportunity. He definitely knew why such a glorified war hero would go on such an adventure. He needed even more glory to fulfill his wish. If he came back with a result, it would be a great achievement. Anyway, since even his achievement in the war wasn't enough, and he needs to participate in this task, just what did he ask the Emperor for then? Even to the lack of response, he said it was fine and would listen when he returned. The hero believed that he would definitely succeed and stay alive. While waiting, he kept turning his head around, the same thoughts. He wanted to find out, but he couldn't even move his legs. Was it fear of guilt, or just plain embarrassment? The judgment of his comrades in clearing a path to the Demon King, but when he was asked to stay first, what came to his mind was relief. Yes, he decided, he owed it to the survivors to at least see the results of the fight. If they won, he would bring them back, but if they lost, it should be reported. Everything should be fine if he watched from afar. Except when he looked out from behind the bushes, he saw the worst of it. Things were clearly coming to an end, but not the end that these heroes wanted. In front of the hero stood a gang of demons with their leader. Sure, he was quite strong, but the number of his enemies was too huge. Then the Demon King asked him to say his last words before he killed him. The man was quite confident and wanted to win in this fight, except the kid wasn't going to give up and decided to use what was given to him as a hero. At that moment, a bright flash of light erupted from his chest. It was a true self-destruction. The bright light blinded the eyes of everyone around him. This was how it ended. Now he had to report it to the Empire. Only behind him was already a huge monster. He asked, who was here without his permission? This person he thought was a small bug that had been hiding here all this time, and now he was going to destroy him. It didn't take the monster long to attack the kid. The blow with his huge hand was very strong and caused an incredible flash of light that rose high into the sky. Only he failed to hit the man. The boy bounced off just in time and was angry that he was now being picked on by this monster. How was it even possible to swing a sword without warning? In his opinion, this was not how fights were supposed to start. At this rate, he wouldn't be able to escape, so he needed to exhaust his opponent somehow. He had to come up with a plan in a matter of seconds. How to attack the huge monster had yet to be figured out. The warrior was agile enough to leap past it, only it needed even more speed to do so. This way, he would be able to confuse his opponent by slipping past its blows. Such actions could cause the enemy to fall on the spot. The monster himself was angry that some small boy was leading him around. He was already high in the sky to plunge his dagger into this demon. He was able to do so, but the strike wasn't too deep, so it was extremely hard to get hurt by it. It was worth coming up with something better. Of course, he knew it would be too hard to pierce his skin with that much force. One had to dodge to avoid falling into the clutches of this hunter. Once again, he plunged his dagger into the monster's flesh. Just because of the monster's heavy blows, the ground began to split beneath them, and they flew down. With a huge rumble, they landed downwards. This greatly frightened the demons present. From the dust that rose up, they could not understand what was happening. Just like that, the man remained alive, which led him, much to his surprise. Some extraordinary way he was able to defeat his opponent. He most likely survived because he fell on the ogre, using his weight, whether he could impale him. It didn't matter though, since he had fallen off a cliff. He ended up in the center of the enemy camp. It wasn't a good moment in his life either. Everyone was surprised that the 7th Corps commander had been defeated. Just how strong was this man that he was able to achieve such results? So he landed and killed the demonic Corps commander right in front of their eyes. It was a very foolish act on his part, but there was no other choice. And now the Demon King was standing in front of him. He was glaring at him like he wanted to kill him, even though that was his purpose. Here was their hero himself, who asked what his comrade was doing here. He should have known beforehand that he would use self-destruct, so why had he come? He had to apologize because he wanted to do his duty. Although the heroes truly hoped that at least he would survive this fight. After that, he stopped the self-destruct. Apparently, he wanted to say goodbye to his friend. Contrary to what he is known to the rest of the world, he is unimaginably kind and loyal. If only he could be the next hero. Guy asked the universe for his final request, that this man survive. Next to him, he started to self-destruct and asked to give this kid at least one fragment of himself. That's why the huge flash hit him as well. This light could only mean that the hero was trying to transfer his powers to him, for it was different from self-destruction. The flash struck even the Demon King. Next, one could see how the dead body ended up in the hands of this man, who remained alive after everything. It was at this moment that he was considered strong. The hero should have known it was impossible to transfer the strength of a hero just by wishing for it. He couldn't believe that the man had stopped his self-destruction just to transfer his powers to him. He wondered for a second, but there was absolutely no change in his body. Even now, he was still weak. This made him feel sad. Just because of that, the demons thought that the man had killed the hero, that is, stopped him from self-destructing and killed him. To them, it was amazing. You'd think he was in terrible agony if he got hit by a hero with no chance of him being okay. He was vomiting blood again. Perhaps it was from the shock of falling off the cliff. But it didn't matter now. He wouldn't be able to get through all those demons. It seemed to be the end, even though he had fought so hard to survive. His Majesty wondered how an ordinary boy could laugh in such a situation. He asked what was the name of this stranger who was able to kill both a demon and even a hero. He had no idea what this man's intentions were, but it was in his best interest to tease him. After that, he introduced himself. That pleased the king, and he asked if the man had ever thought about joining the demon army. At this point, he thought about it, to create a distraction and try to escape when the opportunity arose. In the end, he responded by agreeing to join the army. Only internally, he himself didn't realize what he had just done if a second ago he was trying to escape from here alive. They needed to make it clear beforehand that there was no need to worry about objections from humans or demons. It was strange to see such an enemy being good-natured. After witnessing what had happened, they wouldn't even dare to think of a confrontation now. After all, he had killed both the demon and his hero at once. He was only trying to survive, but he never thought it would happen this way. It started that day. Everyone in the Demon King's castles, including the king himself, thought he was amazingly strong. They should slow down, after all. They had gone so far that he was now deathly afraid of the future. At this time, the aide informed his leader that they had arrived at their destination. It was the border between the human world and the demon dimension, transmitting where the incessant battle between the two was taking place. He had arrived at exactly such a place, where Jakar was waiting for him. Judging from his condition, things were going pretty badly here. He should have turned him down right on the spot, but he figured he would die immediately, so there was nothing he could do about it. He had no choice in the matter from the start. Jakar thought so, but as expected, his expression softened after they left the castle. Now he was sure the man was looking forward to the battle. The man apologized and promised not to disappoint him. At the moment, there is a lull period, and they don't know when the battles will resume, so he can prepare in advance. As soon as the Imperial troops begin to act, the leaders would want the Zero Corps commander to join the battle as well. This frightened the boy even more. At the Imperial barracks, they reported the arrival of the Zero Corps commander. According to their scout, thanks to the news, the Demon King soldiers were now in high spirits from yesterday. It was a headache for the Empire because a famous bastard had come here. That was why their superior had stopped this conversation. Lord Zero Corps, the trump card of the demons. His presence is surprised by many people. In terms of strength, he surpasses even the commander of the First Corps, although the latter should be the strongest among the 12. It was unclear what they should do now. If this was true, they couldn't guarantee their victory now. This irritated their warlords. The solution was to send an assassin, although one of the soldiers decided that they wouldn't stand a chance anyway because that one wouldn't succeed. Unfortunately, the Empire still thought the Zero Corps commander was just a rumor because no one was able to confirm the truth. Perhaps it was an illusion created by the king to boost morale. This man was a hero of the people whose name was Cruel. If they could uncover the truth with just one assassin, it would be a great achievement. Right now, getting information was the priority. The Lord's aide was preparing him for battle by rewinding his arms. For Arudis, these events were a heavy burden. Would he seriously need to participate in the battle, although he was worried about the pressure and possible outcome, but he never worried about the status of a commander. But right now, the Lord was really puzzled by the position he held. Ed worried about his superior's condition. He was shaking so badly that it was hard for him to bandage him. He told the aide not to be so careful. He would just look at the new hero anyway and back off. Ed stared like a madman at his petty officer. The ally didn't know how to react to such a decision by his captain. Anger overwhelmed him. After all, they didn't even know when the battle would start. The human world is right in front of them. Their sun was rising, so he needed to bandage his hands even more carefully than usual. It was noticeable that he really wasn't watching himself, not even realizing how worried Ed was about him. Although it was nice, for some reason he follows him without any complaints. I wonder what was so special about him. He vomited blood, fainted easily, and burned easily when he was in the sun for long periods of time. Anyway, any way you look at it, just a useless and weak man, trash. So, why does he continue to be his vice commander? Maybe he's not a demon, but a true angel. Though, after saying that they would cut out all humans without any problems, it was obvious that he wasn't. This cloth was specially made by the king using magic, so he can fight as long as his heart desires it will reflect the sun's rays. It will also regulate his body temperature. As long as it doesn't become torn to shreds, the fabric will self-heal. The boy heard that the man had even used a spell for transparency around the eyes, nose, and mouth. He was boasting about it a lot. Judging from the way he uses magic without any restrictions, His Majesty must value him very much. Although the boy just thought that the king had too much of this magic, so he was sticking it everywhere. Magic is something that breaks the rules of the world. Demons, on the other hand, have a limited amount of it, and demonic energy spent on magic cannot be replenished. In addition, it is said that the more demonic energy used up, the faster a new hero will appear. If he's using so much magic, it means he's confident that he can defeat the new hero, though it was none of his business at all. The boy thanked his assistant, even though it annoyed him a lot. But his outfit was quite comfortable. In this battle, as long as they had Zero Corps and such a commander, they had nothing to worry about. From the moment the stranger had cleverly snuck into the training field, all the Corps members had been practicing like crazy. Since he had no one else to trust, he wanted others to take care of him in such a difficult moment. After everything, he decided to check on the 9th Corps commander and look around the tent. Although Ed thought it was better to conserve energy before the battle, who would have thought that Sir Arudis would have so much enthusiasm? Of course it was an excuse, and he was happy to get out of there. The Lord was going to buy himself some time and look out for places to hide, but the demons appeared before his eyes. There were quite a few of them. They couldn't believe their eyes after fighting hard, but now they thought they had nothing to worry about. No one could deny it, that they would definitely win next time. Therefore, everyone was looking forward to the next battle. For Jaikar, as expected, His Majesty's decision was the right one, but his presence alone had encouraged so many warriors. But he just wanted no one to pay any attention to him, and now he would definitely not be able to hide anymore. To these demons, he was the last hope. Meanwhile, an assassin from the human team was watching what was going on in the demon's hideout. He had verified with his own eyes that this was not a rumor. There was no doubt now that the Zero Corps commander really existed. But to him, he looked petty and weak, which was surprising. But it was the indifferent attitude and the strong pressure he radiated, even though he was in a robe. There was definitely no mistake. While he may be powerful, the man is sure that the rumors were clearly exaggerated. Since he has completed the task, he can head back. But since he's here, he'll check to see how strong this boy is. He had to fire the deadly poison dart. It was already flying towards the Lord, who was about to return to his tent. There was no doubt that he would be able to avoid this attack. It seemed that he could even hear the unimaginable sound of a flying needle. It was too beautiful. One could see that he had dodged spectacularly from the attack from the humans, without even falling to the ground. The assassin should have been worried, for he was immediately caught. Only it was different. He almost fell because of a rock that was on the ground and was angry that they weren't cleaning the roads. The demon noticed that Sir Arudis was in trouble because he sat down so suddenly. He had to pretend it was just a warm-up. That calmed the girl down, because their main salvation was already warming up for the upcoming battle. Apparently, there are no good hiding places here. He'd better not wander around and fall, but just stay in the tent. The man didn't realize what was going on. If his enemy was returning, however, then he was safe. That seemed very suspicious. Or maybe he just didn't want his subordinates to know about the suspicious enemy. Even though he was their rival, he looked awesome. He must be about to inform his most loyal demons to fight him in secret. Should the assassin retreat now? But he couldn't confirm the skills of a Zero Squad leader with just one test. If it was suddenly possible to determine his level, it would be a huge plus for the Empire. At this time, Ed was surprised by his captain's early return. It seems he had returned too early and didn't let the usually lieutenant drink wine alone. For more information, he decided to ask about the new hero among the human soldiers. Maybe this boy really was serious? The warrior heard the second corps commander studying him. He was wearing a helmet, also his face was not visible, and all that was known was his outstanding swordsmanship skills. The Imperial assassin looked up at them. He didn't understand why he hadn't been reported until now. It was unclear why he was suddenly asking questions about his master Cruel. Maybe he had managed to figure out that he was the one who had sent him. Arut couldn't help but notice the alcohol on the table. It made him angry, because Ed drinks alone and never offers it to him. He decided to make a quick excuse and said that he got this bottle especially for his boss. Since it was a battlefield, it would be perfectly fine to drink a little to calm his nerves, although the young man thought he was about to die. It should be all right. During this battle, he could rage as much as he wanted, but what he really cared about was tasting his favorite drink. In another moment, he thought he heard extraneous sounds that distracted him from the wonderful time he was having. The assassin already thought his opponent was a fool. He was distracted by the stone the man had thrown, but fortunately, he didn't notice his drink being poisoned. It was a most deadly poison, killing in an instant in a single sip. Except that no matter how much they dreamed of their opponent's death, it shattered the wine glass in an instant. Even things like that couldn't help the Empire. Now he felt that there was someone else among them. Something strange, yet something that had always saved him from his enemies, had been instilled in him again. And again, his gut changed. Now he didn't understand why the glass flew away like that. What was going on inside his mind, he didn't realize it himself. In fact, he just wanted to chase away the annoying fly that was bothering him. He had to pour the wine into a new glass so as not to anger the head. Somehow, unusually, the glass, once again, flew to the top. Whether it was coincidence or an inner warning of danger, it had to be dealt with. At this point, he was trying to tell Ed that he hadn't done it on purpose. Only the lieutenant had already noticed that something unusual was indeed going on here. Judging by the flashes of steam coming from the wine that spilled over the floor, it was clear that poison had been added to it. The attendant realized that there was an enemy here. The assassin quickly flew off the roof of the building. He needed to report this to the Empire immediately. Or better yet, immediately to Mr. Cruel so he could set up. The Zero Corps commander's abilities were not exaggerated in the slightest. Everything was literally true. He was actually a dangerous man, which meant that everyone had to know about it now. Jaikar was starting to get angry. Someone had dared to infiltrate this place, which meant their task was to assassinate the head of the Corps. That was unacceptable. The ordinary warriors couldn't defend the area and didn't even know how the enemies had gotten here. Except for Arot himself, no one noticed it. They would take their punishment later for allowing the intruder to enter. For now, they needed to make sure there were no more enemies in the area. He was angry at the fact that he could actually die right now. So he had been invited here as a big target, even though he was considered a great protector. The lieutenant urgently needed to apologize to his comrade, who was clearly angry now. The mood was ruined for everyone. Because of his stupidity, he hadn't noticed the infiltration until it was too late, though he didn't think they could get past an employee like Ed, and it shows how experienced this assassin is. After that, he wanted to step down from his position. Because of this position, even the Empire wanted to kill him. What disappointed him the most was that he couldn't drink because of this. After all, before he poured it for him, the bottle was closed, though the man was already ready to gladly accept any punishment. It was necessary to make sure that the poison was in the glass and not in the bottle. A test subject would be perfect for that. There was another pleasure, though. This way he would be able to take a sip from the bottle because the alcohol was quite innocent there. The Empire reported that their enemy was overkill. It looks like all these rumors are completely justified. If things continued at this rate, the Empire had no chance. The Lord knew that the assassin was a really good warrior, turned around scared out of his wits. Was their enemy really that serious? They need the other person to defeat the demonic faction, since those side had the strongest commander. They didn't want to set themselves up. They had another hero of the Empire in mind, but since he wasn't with them now, they would have to retreat. For Krele, it was the only right thing to do. But if they retreated now, wouldn't it look like they were afraid of this ghostly commander? This made the man very angry at the head. Still, they would retreat, but if a single shit would follow them, they would have to give him the most special death. The decision was made to leave the land before the first ray of sunshine. They don't need to cross swords over these useless lands. They must make the demons believe in it. They will retreat without showing their weaknesses, and also convey that they will not fight until they invade the human world. It was necessary to give everyone this message, but then what to say to the Empire? The orders given to him were to return the lands of the Empire that had been taken over by the demons, not to expand the territories at the expense of the demons' possessions. They've already taken back the Empire's lands. They didn't need any more discord between their worlds, so they decided to retreat. That's what they would report. That should have worked. He shouldn't go overboard and ruin his debut as a hero. He'd come this far, and he wouldn't let just anyone tarnish his reputation. Cruel was more of a villain. One could only hope that the Zero Squad commander wouldn't wreak havoc, though there were rumors that going into battle himself was a rarity for him. That was good to hear. In that case, they needed to move to execute the plan. But one of the Empire members had already stormed into the tent where the leaders were sitting. The boy was scared because the demon army was on its way. Heading it all was the commander of the Zero Corps. Their plan was ruined in a matter of seconds. The captains turned around at the eerie screams and realized that luck was not on their side today. Running away from here now didn't make any sense. Even the new hero realized that his command had failed. Nothing was going according to his plan. Now it was necessary to prove his strength in battle. Crazy Arut laughed and attacked defenseless people. Now rage raged within him, and a thirst to kill anyone who stood in his way. All he had was only a dagger, but it was with it that he pierced all human flesh. He enjoyed watching the blood that spurted from the wounds. The suffering of humans was just beautiful. With his dagger, he could cut off the limb of anyone. So he watched the fear and consternation that fed his spirit. But it was not his plan to leave anyone alive. Each time, he repeated to himself that it was necessary to kill to the last so that you could not be attacked again. Ed, as always, followed his master and killed people. His boss had a whole bottle of wine and was clearly drunk, but it was still better than nothing. Thanks to Sir Arutus, everyone is encouraged. People started going crazy just at the sight of that silhouette. For them, it was sometimes even worse than death because they had to experience a lot of torment before it. Who else could be called a devil if not this man? What was it that had such an effect on his nature that the memory could evaporate at any moment and never come back? The man knew he had to fight in order to survive, but he didn't want to because he was very scared. All he asked was to stay away from him. Would he become a corpse, just like that comrade of his? Would anyone be able to help him in this difficult moment? He was hardly safe right now. He leaned over his victim and wondered why he was just sitting here. After all, if he wanted to live, he should fight. But the man only continued to shake with fear. But if he was not going to fight, he would die quickly. Arut simply swung his dagger to show how he would die now. That warrior was very lucky today because a huge, glowing flash struck the demon and immediately threw it away from its victim. It seemed to be tears of joy that someone had saved him. It was an unbelievable miracle. Apparently not all of them were ready for such battles. With great speed, the boy flew straight into a tree. Some hero had obviously gathered courage and decided to engage in battle with this invincible opponent. Of course, the lieutenant immediately ran to Sir Arutus. Someone dared to deal him a crushing blow and didn't even fear the consequences. That meant his subordinate would take revenge. The wounds were indeed serious, and blood was all over his face and body. The comrade was too much afraid for his superior after all. He had promised to keep him safe. Definitely, this person was a true hero. His body was covered in armor, so that no one could get too close to him and harm him. He was going to kill the opponent with a single blow, only he didn't succeed the first time. The protective necklace from Ms. Ririnel that could save him from instant death helped. If not for it, Arut would have died from this attack. The warrior looked towards his hero, while the lieutenant defended his mentor. All of them were thinking of the next steps to take in order to survive. The new hero of the Empire, Cruel, was the star of the battles. He had the lives of hundreds of people in his hands. The boy thought he would now be saved from attack. But not this time. The demon minion was already on his feet, holding his bloody dagger. There was no way he could stay still. He would be killed so easily. Now they decided to get to know each other better. Everyone was calling him the new hero of the Empire. Only Cruel thought himself unworthy of the title. Even this guy had heard about the man His Majesty had sent. There were rumors that he was actually gorgeous. But he thought that the voice sounded truly familiar. Perhaps they had met before. It was simply possible to remove his helmet for that. But how could one ask to remove his helmet right in front of his opponent? Of course he refused, though he saw the same thing in his opponent, something familiar. This is the first time they are facing each other. So why can't they get away from the thought that they have seen each other once before? Arut decided that if his opponent didn't want to remove his helmet himself, he would have to do it himself. The young man wasn't the least bit afraid to get that close to his opponent. In fact, the Zero Corps commander was quite fast, so the man could lose him even out of sight, which brought him closer to death. But that didn't mean he couldn't keep track of his movements at all. The fight would be interesting enough for both of them. They dodged each other's attacks with ease. Crazy Arut smirked when he couldn't reach his opponent. He was amused by these games. Come to think of it, the man had said earlier that the title of hero was too serious for him. Was it worth confirming that? But the man was against such persistence. Although his speed was annoying, his attacks were nothing special. The man didn't understand why everyone was so hooked on him in battles. He figured he could handle it if he kept pushing with his strength and stamina. The Imperial warrior was worth proving his strength right now. Their strength opposed each other and gave off a bright glow that could be seen from different parts of the area. Everyone was cheering for their commander. The man had no way of understanding why his opponent's attacks were so weak. Maybe he wasn't fighting at full strength. He couldn't understand if he didn't care or if he was hiding his strength like that. But he didn't care, because the hero had the advantage. Then Arut realized that his opponent had already noticed everything, which meant it was time to end this fight. The man couldn't believe his ears. How dare he if the war wasn't over yet? And especially the demons were the first to cross the border and break the rules. But that was the end, because the hero killed the commander of the 9th Corps. But even after regaining the lands of the Empire, he was not satisfied, and continued to take over the territories of the demons. They just took what was theirs. There was a suggestion to not waste each other's strength anymore. It would be better to just settle on the fact that they were both defending their territories. The man realized that the boy was right. They already had the lands back, so they no longer needed to fight and deviate from the original plan. But if things continued, he could get rid of the commander. Even if he wanted war so badly, no one could think that his soldiers would agree with him on this matter. Because of this, he began to lose his temper. This time, he decided to retreat, while those were in a good mood. They had suffered heavy losses. It would be better to follow the original plan. The demon captain happily turned around and left. He hoped he would never see him again, so they walked in opposite directions without turning around. They couldn't believe their good fortune, and it was all thanks to Sir Arutus. They had fought for so long, and he had come and saved them all in an instant. It was a great loss to retreat like that. It would have been the perfect moment to attack, since the Imperial soldiers were demoralized. Jaikar was not pleased. The demon was sure that his colleague had a good reason for stopping the battle. Since he himself was looking forward to it, there was no need to spoil his mood. With extreme warmth, he placed a hand on his shoulder and told him that he had done the job well. There was no need to ruin the good relationship between them. His body weakened again, and he collapsed into Jaikar's arms. It was quite unexpected for the man, so he was afraid something had happened to him. Even the commander noticed that the boy's body was burning in such a state, but he still showed courage. Was that why he retreated in the middle of the battle? It seems he suppressed his desire to fight further and thought of his health first. All so that his opponent wouldn't notice anything. A doctor and his assistant ran up to the weakened fellow to keep him on his feet. After all, his loss was directly related to the morale of the demonic army. Fighting while in such a state, he was completely exhausted. It was simply unbelievable, but he urgently needed to be brought inside the tent. The Zero Corps commander appeared out of nowhere, took his position, and ended up failing his health. He definitely had to be well taken care of. This kid had killed the previous 7th Corps commander and stopped the hero from self-destructing. On top of all that, the Demon King had recruited him. Jaikar knew he couldn't disown him, but still continued to feel uneasy. He might have suspected something. Today, Sir Arut had proven why he was the commander of the new corps in the demon world. Other than that, he asked to rely on him this time. Mrs. Reincarnation was angry. The seal had broken. This was a real disaster. What if the monsters got into the castle? What kind of pathetic monster could break the seal of such a powerful demon? It was about the necklace she had given to the Lord. The girl was sure that her comrade was in great danger now, so she didn't know what to do. Therefore, she decided to leave. Although His Majesty said to guard the seal while everyone was away, His Majesty had already met his best warrior after the battle, except he was still being helped because he could barely stand on his feet. The tired boy immediately wanted to address his king. Meanwhile, the lieutenant bowed, showing his respect. The man was amused. He heard that his ward had made a spectacle of himself this time too, never letting him down. Now, it was important for him to find out how the meeting with the new hero had gone. There was something he needed to report about him. One could see by his mood that he was still reeling from the past battle. So it was suggested to talk inside. The commander of the 2nd Corps also extracted information. Judging from the kid's face, he didn't like the 2nd Corps commander very much. He was very busy right now because he was sorting through all the information. He wouldn't be able to leave his room for a long time, so he didn't need to worry. He needed to change his clothes and meet everyone in his office afterward. He was offered to look at the documents first. There were some interesting facts described there that might surprise him. Once again, his mind was filled with confusion as to what he was doing inside the Demon King's castle. When did he have time to return? For just now, he was on the battlefield. Reincarnation had already gotten close enough to her returning comrade. She wanted to know that her dear man was all right now, except Aruth didn't know what she meant. He just wanted to get drunk before he died. Apparently, he passed out again because of the alcohol. He'd only had one bottle. He's already lost all his tolerance. She'd been told that the necklace she'd been given had broken, so the girl headed straight to the front lines to see if he'd returned to the castle. Either way, she was glad she ran into him. Wasn't the necklace supposed to protect him from sudden death at least once? And since it broke, that meant he was almost dead. Still, it had managed to corner the hero and even retake the demon lands. It was an amazing outcome to the battle. It seems he got drunk again and did something incomprehensible. She was now hugging him tightly and was glad to be back. In his arms was information about a new hero. His name he would never forget, because this man he couldn't help but love. His older brother, Cruel Heart, who knew exactly his sibling's name. In those long-forgotten times, they were still together. Back then, he had tried to raise his youngest. The man knew what the boy was capable of. Perhaps he had tried to stop him at the time. Then, with tears in his eyes, he asked his brother for help. His hands and clothes were covered in another man's blood, one of the shameful moments of his life. And the eldest member of the family only drew his sword with anger to repay such a horror. The relationship in their family was not the most favorable. Now, it remained to be seen since when did this man become the new hero? Quickly apologizing and saying that some business came up, he decided to leave first. The girl only wished him safe business. The Zero Corps commander is seriously intimidating. So why did his mood suddenly turn bad? It seems like the mistress was in love with this boy. Even though he was mean, she thought he was hot and admired every word he said. The Emperor already knew everything that had happened, but he still made sure Cruel took the hero's stance, right when he needed to come back. After looking at the parchment, he could remember what had happened. But it seemed like now was the time to go to the Empire. With His Majesty's permission, he would also dig up more information. They would start to suspect something if his absence dragged on for too long. The Demon King put his hand down and began to put on tracking magic, which was a guarantee in a way. Of course, he wanted to know if there was anything useful to be found. This man was particularly cunning and was overprotective of the boy for a reason. So why would he need to be a spy for his king again? Since this seal was on him, then it wasn't a dream. He definitely loses his memory under extreme stress. Every time he forgot everything, he was in shock. He should worry less if he didn't want to lose his memory permanently. The lieutenant heard from His Majesty that he was going to the human world today. The Lord thought Ed was missing. He was with the king. Yes, it is time for him to go back, and there is something personal that Aruth has discovered. Perhaps his aide wants to tell him about it. Before that, the head himself had offered Ed to become a corps commander. This shocked the young man. That was because the position of the 9th commander was now vacant. Until now, all the positions of commanders had been filled and he had to appoint him as vice commander. But judging from his skills, he was clearly worthy of more. He was the first to be offered the position. It was an offer he couldn't refuse, while Ed served Sir Arutus. The man had completely forgotten that this was the position he'd always wanted. But if he accepted the offer, who would replace him? The king didn't understand, for they would surely find someone else to replace him. Of course, he wasn't going to force him, so he asked him to think hard. But if he refused in the end, this offer would go to someone else. Would he really accept that a newcomer weaker than him would stand taller as well? In the end, he failed to fully report the conversation, except that the Lord himself thought he had been told off for his commander's bad behavior. So the lieutenant decided it would be best not to say anything, so he asked not to worry. He was always smiling. Since Arut was already leaving, Ed would report to the chief to prepare food for the trip to the human world. It was obvious from his expression that he wanted to say something, but the Lord decided not to press him. One of the soldiers had already arrived and reported that the carriage was ready for departure. It was worth hurrying. Arut asked his comrade to take care of himself until he got back and decided that he would ask to step down as vice commander because he was too much of a burden on him. Since he was going to the Empire, maybe his comrade wanted something that was only available there. He should have found out before he left and thanked him for his help in some way. He liked the appetizers from there, didn't he? Maybe he could find something there for long-term use. He'd be taking a lot of stuff this time anyway, so Ed had better just tell him what he wanted. Was there any other leader in the demon realm who also worried about his subordinates? He doesn't need anything special, so let the boy just pick what he sees fit. More importantly, he must wear the necklace from Ben at all times, and remember to wear the robe while in the human world. There was no commander-in-chief here who needed as much help, but the fact that Sir needs it not one bit didn't upset him. Rather, it shows that he respects him more than anyone here. As expected, he doesn't want to become a corps commander. He likes being Sir Arut's vice commander. That's the kind of unexpected answer he gave. So, wherever the Zero Corps commander goes, he will be waiting for him here as vice commander. He politely said goodbye and showed that his attitude was truly sincere. The Empire was quiet today. 2 guards were standing near the gate guarding their castle. Well, suddenly they noticed someone approaching. It was a stranger in a cloak. They told him to stop. After all, this was Earl Hart's estate. He meanwhile did not even dare to raise his head, and his face was covered. The Earl was not in the manor now, so visitors were not allowed to enter. The young warriors immediately pointed their weapons at the uninvited guest. The boy only said to open the gate, so what was wrong with him? Did he really not care if he turned the count against himself? If he approached, they would be forced to attack. He was actually trying to get into his own house. Would they dare to interfere with him? He needed to reveal his face so they would realize that their master had come to see them. Everyone around them immediately became nervous. They had to hurry, for the count had returned. The servants lined up in 2 rows and greeted their leader, although he had told them that they shouldn't greet him like this. Only they couldn't afford not to fulfill their duties. Therefore, they would have to put up with it. The most important person there was the butler of Remember Manor. He greeted his master with special respect. The man has been here since he inherited the manor. When he sees him, he feels as if he has truly come home. They hadn't seen each other for about 6 months. It was interesting to see if he had successfully completed the subjugation of the monsters. The society thought that he went on an expedition to subdue monsters under the orders of the Empire. It was a bit embarrassing to talk about how things had gone differently. The butler noticed that the boy was injured. He was already so old that he was no longer able to punish the monsters. Arutus yanked his arm away from him, telling him that it was all right, for he was no longer a child. It was like that, for he was now a respected earl, though old habits weren't so easy to get out of his head. He must have matured after his long journey. Should he prepare a room for the little lord? But there was no need for that. He's off to see the emperor in a jiffy. Arut is sure that the Emperor already knows that he has returned to the Empire, though it was at this very moment that he would like to lie down in his bed. On top of everything else, he needed to ask about Cruel. All of their family members had been assigned to different places. All he could say was to agree to the order and follow it. As always, the man only bowed obligingly. The Empire was already discussing the return of Dion Hart. The man sat at the table and listened to his subordinate. The dog Emperor had finally returned to look at his master. It was Duke Illustra Starve. This news brought a smile to his face. What should they do now? After all, the new hero's younger brother had returned to their empire. One solution was to make a request to the Assassin Guild, but what if Krell was followed? They had another card up their sleeve. Even the arrival of such a dangerous man couldn't upset them. Did the gentleman really mean the Revolutionary Army? His aide was a little frightened by this information. If it's a group willing to give their lives to assassinate the Emperor, we'll be involved. Whether they get caught or not didn't matter. The Duke didn't think Sir Cruel would miss something so obvious. It was dangerous to bicker with such a man. He had to apologize and say that he would contact the Revolutionary Army. It was interesting to see just how talented the Emperor's hero was. The Count's servants had already completed his preparations for departure. He was definitely suited to this image of a respectful and honorable man. There was a lot of commotion. Baths, changing clothes were all done instantly. It was finally over for him. Or maybe his military uniform made him even more stunning. Not a chance. Strict style is in vogue these days. The servants kept admiring this boy. All those outfits were white, but then what are they even discussing? The butler asked his master to remember to put on his mask because the sun was high. Even though it was too late to talk about it, he still thanked the man for taking care of the estate. But he would have no regrets, even if right now he died. His young master had grown up to be such a fine earl, and he was honored for the recognition. Though, as he grew older, he was sore in many places. He was going to discuss his resignation as soon as his master returned. It was impossible. He managed everything. Staff, property, finances, and resources, everything was under his control. Where else could one find such talent? Perhaps Remember might change his mind. Suddenly, his decision wasn't thought out enough. He was actually joking. He was pleased to see his boy so excited. He shouldn't have been so worried about the old man. In any case, the career was ready, which meant it was time to go. After such a bad joke, there was no more business to be done. The guy felt that he didn't need that much security. Just a couple of people would suffice. Well, the army was already ready to depart with their chief. Not many in the Empire know of his return, and it wouldn't take long. Half of the soldiers would follow him, and they would be on their way soon. First, he had to suck up to the Demon King, and now he would have to do the same to the Emperor as well. This annoyed him terribly. The current Emperor, Eduardo de Serre, took the throne by removing all competitors. The 9th Prince is the one who killed all his siblings. He carnivalized himself while his clothes were soaked in blood. Even 10 years later, he is the main topic of all discussions. At the end of the coronation, when the bloodshed of his relatives ended, the king ascended the throne. The prince took the position after shedding a lot of blood, so that informed from now on, the state would be under his rule, as well as a new name. After that, the country began to be called an empire. This was the name that the country was given. Obviously, after that, the other countries were not going to stand by. And so the war began. What completely turned his life upside down was an incredibly long 8-year war. It was a living hell, even though he lost half of his memories, because it was too horrible and there was no desire to remember. But the empire that swallowed up a third of the continent had become a true wingman, a true emperor. Due to his achievements in the war, he was given the title of honorary earl, even if he can't remember everything. He was sure he had fought desperately for life, and not remembering anything but the life purpose he had once decided on. Of course, because of that, he now had to go back and forth between the Empire and the Demon Realm. Something stirred the carriage as it traveled. A revolutionary army came across their path. Back then, the boy didn't understand how they had gotten wind of his return, so they also made their way here. This was no good, which meant he had to join the battle to protect himself and his people. One of the brave warriors grabbed the boy by the throat, pressed against a hard surface, thus he wanted to kill him. Finally, he was lucky enough to find the Emperor's dog. There was a look of animalistic desire in his eyes that he had succeeded in catching his prey. This organization was formed during a terrible war. As a result of this war, they had lost their homeland and the people they held dear. Therefore, what else was there to expect from those who had nothing else to lose? They had completely lost their minds trying to destroy the Empire and kill the Emperor. It was His Majesty who created such reckless bastards. He didn't care. He wanted to spit on their beliefs. But becoming a victim wasn't in his plans either. The man was nervous because he had been told that the guy was a hero, but in the end, he turned out to be nothing but a weakling. Although the man was desperately trying to prove otherwise, just in case, he decided to ask what his opponent's name was. The one naturally introduced himself and expected it to be over. He ended up getting grabbed by the neck anyway. Yes, his name was Don Hart, but he wasn't the Emperor's dog, as they all believed here. White hair and red eyes and terrible manners. It was all justified by the rumors. He urgently needed to find a dagger to defend himself. While his opponent dropped his guard, he was able to pull out his weapon to point it in his direction. Only the man was much stronger, blocking all of his attacks and bringing him to the ground. Blood was oozing from his mouth. Now he couldn't breathe. The blows were really strong and his body was quite weak. Until now, this brigand thought that his opponent was a hero. Were the rumors lying? But it seemed like he wasn't going to stop just because he was lied to. Continuing to hold his neck with his hand, he pointed his axe in his direction. But this time, he wouldn't be able to follow through, because his axe was knocked out of his hands by someone's spear. Someone had gotten to that spot and decided to prevent the revolutionary gang member from killing an innocent person. The hit was right on target. The unfamiliar kid rejoiced at his perfect throw towards the enemy. They made it just in time. These people were bloody, ghostly knights. Devils born of 8 years of war and led by Dion Hart. They had a crossed-out imperial emblem. One of the Yalls didn't think they were allowed to let them go. Perhaps they should have put on a real show. That way they would entertain everyone, but primarily themselves. It wasn't their abilities that frightened them, but their complete lack of common sense. They definitely resembled their master with this behavior. With huge smiles on their faces, they began their escape to kill everyone who opposed them. Their bloodlust was even stronger than their thirst for revenge. In addition, they possessed excessive cruelty. All of them should have realized that they couldn't let their enemies die so easily. But who cared about rules? They should have just had fun. All they wanted and loved was to cause blood with their weapons. In that, they were a perfect copy of their commander. If someone came face to face with them, they would definitely lose. The revolutionary armies needed to finish and leave. The only thing this man thought of was to throw the Lord aside to cause him the most pain. But every decision has its consequences. In the end, his arm was well torn, and blood oozed out in rivers. For this, the Count apologized, for he wanted to tear it off completely, but he was too weak. He wasn't feeling well, so he asked to be allowed to finish it quickly. The boy grabbed his opponent's axe to kill him. In the end, everyone who could escaped, and some died, a most gruesome death. The captain at this time was covered in blood. He should have continued his journey onward. Although this unfortunate mishap had caused a lot of trouble and wasted time, what was to be done now? It wasn't enough. This corpse should be made an example of, so that no one else would dare to attack him. He could never stop killing someone. Each time, he struck as many blows as he could manage, to make sure no one could forget this scene. Now, that was their real captain, utterly ruthless. He didn't seem to need their help now, though they'd killed a fair amount of people too. But they couldn't leave so quickly. There were only weak men beside the commander. If it wasn't for their squad, the captain would be in big trouble. The commander called out to his subordinates and asked what they were doing. Their work wasn't finished yet, so they couldn't sit around. There were still a couple of people left to kill. Unfortunately, they couldn't escape while their enemies were busy with others. A little while later, a carriage was approaching the imperial palace. The guards were surprised that it was quite dirty, but they didn't immediately realize what the point was. It wasn't mud at all, but real blood. Soon, Earl Dion Hart came out. His clothes were also covered in blood, and he had not been washed. The warriors said that they couldn't enter the imperial palace uninvited. The boys only needed to introduce themselves so that everyone would realize that he had just come to see His Majesty. They immediately asked for forgiveness, for they knew that the emperor had given this boy the title of Count, granting him the right to visit the palace at any time. We had to locate His Majesty. He was currently in the banquet hall. A banquet was being held to celebrate the debut of a new hero. That meant that his elder brother was here right now. His arrival was just in time. He would be able to take care of everything at once. The fact that Cruel had taken back the lands taken over by the demons was impressive to the emperor. The one was reporting back after his exit to the battlefield. Cruel bowed his head while kneeling on his knees. Naturally, he was only doing his duty, but earning praise from His Majesty was not so easy. Today, they were celebrating the birth of a new hero named Cruel Heart. Everyone congratulated him on his debut. Now, they would enjoy the evening. But an uninvited guest had already burst into the banquet hall. Everyone was amazed that he was covered in blood. The guests didn't know who it was, but it was the height of indecency. Some couldn't see well, but they noticed that he had red eyes and white hair. They were now definitely convinced that this was the Honorable Earl Dion Hart. No one would have thought he would come to them looking like that. It seems his favorite brother somehow got a fragment of the hero. As he walked, a trail of blood formed behind him, and everyone silently looked at it. Eventually, he approached the emperor, kneeled down and said, "Glory to the Empire." Everyone could only watch with their mouths open. The boy greeted his emperor with special trepidation and called himself a servant. Everyone started discussing blood and said that this earl was a vampire. One wondered if the Hart family had really adopted a vampire and raised him as their own child. Someone had heard that he had been bullied as a child. The Duke noticed that this kid came back alive, which meant he had incredible strength. I guess we can't get rid of him that easily. It had been a long time since they had seen this man. There was talk that he was allowed to come whenever he wanted. But to show up covered in blood and disrupt the banquet was somehow insulting. He apologized because he was ambushed on his way here. But who dared to attack the hero of the Empire? It's a good thing he sent knights to escort him. It seems he had a story to tell. Why don't they go somewhere else for privacy? There were things he wanted to hear from the commander personally. Of course, the Emperor knew that the Revolutionary Army had attacked. No one else would have dared to take such a gamble. His Majesty decided to ask about his guest's well-being. Perhaps he might need the help of a doctor. It was widely known that everyone looked at this young man in a negative way. Still, he was a true hero of the Empire. But right now, there was nothing wrong with him. Only the man liked this young man's methods, because no other talent had achieved the same things he was able to. Their methods were similar, so they communicated well. As the vanguard of the 8-year war, he had accomplished a greater feat than anyone else. This kid was able to kill anyone who was in his way. And when he left, being a fellow hero, he was able to retrieve his body, something no one had ever been able to do before. Usually, a hero defeated by a demon king is given to them to eat, and if Dion Hart couldn't save him, the hero would suffer the same fate. It's incredible to do that against a demon king, but there's a price to pay. Now the Emperor wanted to know how the boy was able to find out how to lift the curse, except he didn't quite understand what he was talking about. He was referring to the seal of the Demon King. But he didn't recognize anything. It wasn't a curse. It was tracking magic. However, the man thinks he's weak because of it. It was noticeable that he was still just as dismissive of the state of his body. The Emperor had sent him to another settlement since only a Demon King could lift the curse. The head of state believed that this person should go back. But he was extremely uncomfortable sending such a rare talent to such a horrible place. He would say such a thing and yet use him as a spy. He also wondered how his enemies were doing nowadays. Everything was the same as before. But he came across the assassin his king had sent to the castle. It was quite an unexpected encounter, considering him a bargaining chip, even though he was a candidate for heroes. So why was he sent to such a wilderness to die? He was trash, defaming the name of a hero. Even the nobleman thought he would die before he reached his destination. One could assume that he had managed to survive because of the hero's fragment. Well, it could be said that because of this scum, his status in the demon realm had increased significantly, so sending him out wasn't that useless. Even this man knew that Arut was the commander of the Zero Corps. The information reached him very quickly. Because of that, he immediately blew up to apologize, for there was no way he could refuse their enemy, lest he question his position. It was all right, for he was not trying to incriminate him with it. The more they accepted the Lord, the easier it was to get information. To be recognized, even in a place like this, showed that he was truly talented. He had one last chance to ask for what he had come here for in the first place, though it was hard for him to bring it up. The question was about his elder brother. Why on earth was he put in charge? After all, His Majesty must have known that the kid only regretted not being able to kill him. The elder was the only remaining member of the family that survived this boy. The brother always called for his youngest when his parents were expecting them. The boy had been distinguished by his unusual appearance since childhood. His red eyes were always large and surprised. It was already lunchtime. They had to hurry to the family. As the youngest in the family, he was a little sluggish and did not notice the important things. After all, if anything, it was the grown-up boy who was scolded for not looking after his younger brother. For this reason, he couldn't hold his relative's hands, making the excuse that his hands were dirty because he had just returned from a workout. At the time, the little boy apologized for such a thing. He wasn't intimidated by dirty hands, but it was hard to realize at the time that there was more to it. In the end, he could barely keep up with his little brother because he was too fast. When the latter stopped, the young man crashed into him and hit him. He must have really liked that family portrait. The little boy used to stare at it all day long. Every time he looked at it, and he thought this portrait said, "We are a family." It lifted his spirits. But to the other, it was just a picture. They were completely different, and the only thing they had in common was living together. Crail had told him not to hang around too much and to stay in his room. They had completely different values, and one couldn't understand the other. That was why the youngest always felt like he was alone. The servants were discussing the red eyes and white hair of the second youngest lord. They wondered why he was the only one who was so different. Every time he looked at that portrait, he felt like he was part of this family. He wished he had been born with the green eyes and black stripes that epitomized the Hart family. As the boys entered the dining hall, their father reiterated that they needed to hurry, since they needed to attend the royal family's banquet today. The mother was worried that Dion wasn't feeling well again. She was very worried about her son, and every change was a tragedy for her. Her husband told her to calm down because he couldn't stay at home forever. But she couldn't behave, or else suddenly something would happen to him. He was already very weak. Was she really suggesting locking him up forever? They had always kept him hidden from the Empire. There were already rumors going around, so they couldn't go on living like this. Dion needed to realize that he always had to remain cautious when he left the house. He couldn't let anyone find out about his flaws. Of course, the little boy remembered everything. He was sure that his parents were not happy with him because of it. He didn't look like them, and he had a weak body. All of these are huge problems for such a famous county. But the eldest son decided to go to his father and ask about the new fencing coach. He didn't like the attention being paid to another member of the family. It was noticeable that he changed the subject because of his brother, but in this life, he was never interested in anything around him. He tried to follow all the rules of the outside world. New workers were hired by their dad for their eldest son so that his skills would get better and better. It gave him great pleasure. The atmosphere at the table changed once Cruel started talking. It was hard for them to find a good swordsman. Even though he said so, he still enjoyed it. Was he lonely despite the fact that they were together? He blamed himself for his loneliness. Since he was a flawed child, if he tried hard enough, he could be like a brother. Then his family would love him more too. When they arrived at the palace, the little boy was called out by someone. He was dressed up in his best clothes and looked different from everyone else. It was other children from distinguished families. They definitely wanted to make fun of the new kid today. They were all spoiled because of their wealth. He was so pleased that someone spoke to him. It was the first time he had ever talked to someone his own age. He was glad, of course, but what if he messed up? His parents had gone to see his older brother's fencing teacher and left him here alone. Had it not gotten to him yet? There was a very common rumor that Dion was an outcast in his family. Apparently it was true that his family kept him locked up. The boy tried to deny it. After all, he was just sick a lot and his parents didn't want him to get worse. The child began to insult him with a vile bastard. Even if they were his family, it was impossible to love something like him. He was abandoned by his family. After everything, he called him a true monster. Except this was something the young man couldn't bear. Someone had to get for his horrible words. Why talk this nonsense when you don't know anything? The kid was sure that his family had not abandoned him. Therefore, it was not worth spreading different rumors. The other boy decided to take revenge and smashed his fist into the face of his new acquaintance. They started fighting. One couldn't think that he was part of the Hart family just because of his last name. After all, to everyone he was just a monster, a mistake of humanity. He called him a disgusting bastard who was turned away by his own family. It was unclear who the little kid was angry at. He wanted to shout to the world that he was not a monster. One of the adults noticed this and tried to stop the attacker. The beaten young man was lying on the floor of the palace, and someone was already calling for him. Now more than ever, he lacked a mother's love and care. Except, what would happen after this? His older brother ran after him, but not at all to pity him. Of course, he blamed it all on him. These events would not go unnoticed. The young man's face was burning with rage. After all, he would be the one to receive for not looking after his younger brother, which was completely unfair to him. The second young master's body was extremely weak. He was extremely susceptible to stress. You also have to be careful with sunlight. Special care would be required here. It was so bad. There had never been a child in their lineage like this before. Once this could happen. After that incident, there were only more problems. Such a mistake brought the baby to tears. He apologized to his dad and mom. There was little hope left that they would take his side. He promised he would try harder, so he asked them not to hate him. Though even at such a young age, one had to realize that other things decided everything in their world. After his sleepy ramblings, it wasn't his parents near the bed at all. It was his older brother holding his hand and telling him that everything would be all right. Right now, he wanted to tell his rival to look, his whole family really loved him. Even at a time like this, he had a loved one by his bedside. Except his brother was saying he didn't need to try anymore. No one had any more hope for him anyway. Such words shocked him. Fortunately, it was only his nightmare. All the events were jumbled in his head, and he couldn't put together a complete picture. His parents immediately came into the room and wanted to ask him how he managed to fight in the palace. After all, he had already been warned to be careful outside the house. He was so sorry, but he was so eager to tell his story that it was the others who started bullying him. So many insults he had never heard in his whole life, but his father still wouldn't listen to him. What if he was thinking the same way those kids were? These thoughts were tearing his soul apart because he wanted a simple family love so badly. It looked like it really was too early for them to go out into the world. Now he would be forbidden to leave the castle for a while, so he should have thought about his behavior in the room. The certainty that they were disappointed was growing. He couldn't bring them any more trouble. He needed to try to become stronger, to become someone the family would not be ashamed of. The young master did not leave his room today, but even the servants felt uneasy when they looked at him. He tried so hard, but who would even recognize him? Every day, he studied hard to prove that he had the right to be in this family, but they just kept laughing at him and his parents. The husband and wife supported their oldest son and asked him to try harder. He just needed to trust the adults to get on the right track. The toddler was watching all this from the window. Of course, it was frustrating for him because there were no such privileges for him here, but there was no time for envy. If he tried his best, then the family would recognize him. He had a positive attitude and really wanted to show what he could do, and if he wanted that, he needed to get stronger. He decided to practice 30 minutes longer today. Was that his plan? Even though it was so hard, he felt like he was going to die. But he had no right to give up. He still kept trying to practice fencing. His diligence caused his nose to bleed again. Cruel noticed this and ran over to take the stick from his junior's hands. The latter was trying to figure out what he was doing here. He just wanted to get stronger, though. Was it concern, or was he just afraid of losing his place? His brother only repeated what they told him to do, nothing, and sit quietly in his room. He wasn't even given a chance to show what he could do. He wasn't even allowed to try his best because he was a mistake. It broke his heart every time. It shouldn't have been a surprise that he had become like this after a torturous childhood. In the end, he agreed that he wouldn't do anything because no one expected him to do anything. Even his resentment he couldn't express to anyone in this house. After everything, he apologized and said that he needed to rest. So the eldest needed to leave this place. And was he doing it with a displeased face? Then he began to think about what he needed to do to be loved by this family. In his little years, he had worked so hard for something that people usually only get when they are born, and only the butler would ask his young master if he would eat in his room as usual. One could never expect a trick from this man. Dion was already 14 and had always wondered where his family dined. After all, they were clearly all gathered around a large table and enjoying each other's company. The Count and Countess had left to deal with something urgent. At this time, Cruel walked into the same room. He was already 17 years old at that moment. But didn't his older brother have a training session right now? He had finished it back in the morning, so he proposed to go play chess together. After he gave up, his relative came to play chess with him from time to time. The boy noticed that he was too polite. Maybe he had interrupted him from something important, and he couldn't remember the last time he had seen his parents. Oh, and how could he be busy when he was locked in this room with no one to visit him? Although it sounded like he was making fun of his eldest. One could already sit down and start their regulars game. Since the situation in the Empire was unstable, their parents were extremely busy right now. That was also why the other person rarely saw them. Everyone told him that his mom and dad were busy, but he was sure it was all because they didn't want to see his face. For so many years, he had formed this opinion. He knew full well it was a lie, but there was a reason he wanted to believe them. Still, his gut still hoped that they were family. Sometimes, when he was supposed to be sleeping, his mom would visit him, even though he had sworn not to expect love from his family. He could hear his mom apologizing and wishing him sweet dreams. He still tried to look for love in their simplest actions every time. He had hope smoldering inside him, and that's why he thought he was pathetic. Perhaps they were really busy in a big way, and his older brother had decided to let him know that he wouldn't be able to play chess with him for a while. Here again, he realized that his hopes were meaningless. He himself apologized, for it must have been burdensome for his older brother to come here all this time. Unfamiliar voices began to say that when war breaks out, at least one member of the family must be mobilized. More people came into this room. The older man was angry that strangers had unknowingly come in here and didn't even introduce themselves. Their family was an honorable family, and such treatment was wrong. The man was supposed to deliver a message from the Empire, and now he was looking for Dion Hart, which was obviously very startling to everyone. The young butler pointed to the gentleman the knights were looking for. The situation was dire, and it was unclear why they were looking for the weakest member of the family. The young man could see that this all made the older man very angry because his hand was clenched into a fist. It was Dion, who was ordered by one of the knights to go along with him. They weren't going to explain anything, but were only following the orders of their ruler. They grabbed him by the collar and told him they would answer any questions later. This kid looked so puny. Would he even be able to lift a sword? And yet, they wanted to send him to the battlefield. The eldest member of the family tried to stop them because he was the one to be conscripted. There must be some mistake. The Hart family had sent an official request to the royal family, and they were just doing their job. If he thought there was some mistake here, he should discuss it with his parents. No one understood what was going on here, so these people just decided to improve their reputation and fix their son's situation by sending him to certain death. His father and mother decided to send him to war. He's very weak, and if he gets to the battlefield, he'll just die, unable to do anything. So that's what they were apologizing for. They all wanted him to die because he is a failure who dishonors their family. In the end, his family gave up on him. Soon, he would be sent to the front lines, but unless he wanted to die, he needed to get stronger. Therefore, he was encouraged to train, although even holding a sword was hard for him. No one understood what a child of an illustrious family was doing here. All the young lords of other noble families had been sent to safer places. There were rumors that his own family hated him, and they could tell at a glance that he was barely holding his sword. He was probably going to die soon. Except he didn't want to die at all, and that made him start crying. They felt sorry for him there, though, because he was very young. From that day on, his life was no different from hell. He had to fight, though he couldn't even hold his weapon. Endless battle, screams from all sides, and sickening bloody scenes. But he still didn't want to die in a place like this. He was being yelled at to pull himself together. How long was he going to hang in the clouds if he couldn't hold a sword? Let him choose another weapon. And if there were no weapons, then he needed to tear everyone apart with his teeth. It didn't matter if he was weak or young. Once he got here, he had to fight for survival. And this man was right, because he had to survive. It was decided to kill as much as possible because he wanted to live at any cost. That's how he got his first blood on his hands. But his body didn't get any stronger. It still oozed blood in every stressful situation. But he wanted to go home. But, in the end, he still kept killing. To survive. Sometimes he wondered if he was happy back home, and should he go back there. By this time, the gifts that the Empire had sent them had arrived, so everyone needed to sort through them. Since he had first arrived here, he had heard that they had been sent some sort of reward. This was an unexpected event for these soldiers. Someone's daughter had sent a letter to him for the first time after she learned how to write. That must have given him strength. Somebody got a home-cooked meal from a mother he missed dearly. Except, he didn't have much to look forward to. For now, everyone was happy to be remembered by loved ones. This boy was left to fend for himself. Naturally, there was nothing for him. Only a letter was handed to him with an order appointing him commander. That's when he made the decision that he would make sure the Hart family paid for their betrayal, to experience everything he'd been through. He had finally accomplished that, and had come to greet his family properly. He felt no shame for wanting to kill mom and dad. They were scared, but dad wanted to confront his stepson. Why did he have the nerve to come here along with the dagger he had already stained in blood in the war? This was a dream he had cherished for years. He killed his father first. That was how he said goodbye to his entire family, placing his dead mother on top of his father. There was a lot of blood around, but it gave him peace of mind. He wanted them to look at him. They shouldn't have done this to him. When he sought their love, they should have treated him so much better. But in the end, he was hurting, despite wanting it, and striving for it. Now he felt depressed. And his older brother had already entered the hall. The man didn't realize at all what his youngest had put on now. It made him furious, but also very much in pain. And he himself asked his favorite brother for help. But could he think that Cruel would help him? It was utter nonsense to him, so they needed to fight now. He didn't want to leave anyone alive from this family. Perhaps he was just a random bystander, though he had abandoned him in the end as well. But his mind clouded over. One side was asking for help, and the other wanted everyone around him dead. Dion had reached his limit. His mouth was bleeding again, his body resisting such a struggle. In the next moment, he might just pass out in this place. Right now, his main desire was to kill his brother. Only he wouldn't be able to do it because of his poor health. Krell, on the other hand, had every chance. The next moment, Leanne Rayner, the commander of the Noble Knights, called out to the Count. He was thinking about something and didn't hear the girl at all. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, so she greeted His Excellency. The girl was the only normal person among these lunatics from the Noble Knights. Of course, he was very happy to see her. Only when he looked around did he see that he was in the banquet hall of the Imperial Palace. He was taken aback by this fact. He remembered being in the carriage when they were attacked by the Revolutionary Army. But how on earth did he end up in the Imperial Palace, and where did he get that outfit from? The commander noticed that the guy didn't look well. Maybe he felt sick after meeting the Emperor. If that was true, then he had experienced as much stress as possible. So how did he manage to deal with such a dangerous army? His next question was, what was the occasion of the banquet? This really surprised his interlocutor, because this banquet was in honor of the debut of the new hero Cruel Heart. Astonishingly, he approached his so-called brother. He too was surprised that he had managed to get to this place in one piece, even though he'd organized it all himself. He knew he'd had a bad dream for a reason. He obviously didn't want to cross paths. He had two personalities inside him, which often made him confused about events. Green eyes and black hair, the complete opposite of him. The embodiment of the Hart family that he never thought he'd see again. But their meeting was imminent. He was the one person the boy had no desire to meet again, except that while one avoided the other went straight to meet him like a daredevil. A few days ago, during an expedition, he had encountered the commander of the Zero Corps of the Demon Army. Perhaps he realized who it really was. When he saw him raising the spirit of the army with ease, he immediately thought of his younger brother. Their spirits were indeed high and memorable. He heard that he too was capable of effortlessly commanding troops on the battlefield. It would be nice if the boy was also among their team. It sounded too absurd, and he couldn't help himself, so he started laughing loudly. This kind of speech was more like a joke to him. He had no reason to fight alongside him, so it was time to stop making up these fairy tales. They were too close to each other. Those eyes are the same as before, an indifferent gaze expressing a lack of any interest. The same enmity remained between them. Wasn't it time for him to go? He was bound to have some fun before he left, so he asked not to worry about him. He could eat pudding. Anything was better than hanging out with that jerk. The banquet was stupid. He'd just kill some time before he went home. But the older man kept on asking about the monster-slaying assignment. So why did he keep talking to him? One had to ignore him since he didn't want to talk. It was necessary to pretend that he wasn't around. His next question was just worthless. He asked if his brother was in pain. Talking like that could easily make you choke on your food. Why was he being so annoying today? After all, he could take care of himself, so there was no need to pretend to care anymore. Even if something was hurting, he would never tell his big brother about it. He would just watch from the sidelines like he always did. When he was dragged to war that day, one could continue to just keep on just watching as well. He would never forget that terrible pain. One could have calmed down and not wasted the effort of not coming to the palace. It was a disappointment, although Cruel still had something else to say. Duke Illustra Starba appeared on the horizon. She thought she was seeing a very touching brotherly relationship right now, though it was more of a laughing matter. He was the leader of the opposition against the Emperor. Of course, the new warrior immediately decided to bow respectfully. That's the way he was raised. But this was the first time he and the Count had met in person. The man had heard of him, and it was an honor. Now there was another uninvited interlocutor. At everyone's discussion, the young boy ignored the Duke's greeting and did not extend his hand in return. This was an unheard of impudence for a guest. But basically, as expected from Dion Hart, acting like this towards the only Duke in the Empire, being only an Earl. Now, people would be discussing the new gossip. Of course he knew everything, but he had a mouthful of pudding and couldn't answer. He tried to chew as surreptitiously as possible and swallow faster. The Duke, it seemed, was about to explode with anger, but it didn't matter to answer later. But for now, he should just shake his hand, if it could be done. The Crown Prince of the Empire, Elpidius de Serre, appeared. He immediately decided to greet Illustra. The boy was insanely handsome and cute. Was it really honeyed here? Why were they flying down here like bees? Either way, one had to greet him, though the man had already noted that the Duke had not been at the palace for a long time, probably due to heavy busyness. His Highness turned his back to the boy while the Duke apologized to him. This could be understood as a protest against his presence. It was decided that he should be the one to apologize, quite tactless of him. I'm sure the Duke had his reasons. Though I thought to myself that when the man had arrived, he'd immediately start hanging around the Earl of Hart like a cunning scoundrel. And as a military commander, he wasn't going to sit idly by, so he should protect this guy, but anyway, he got a chance to eat his food. But all his plans went to shit because another man ran up behind him, which means all the pudding is about to come out. It was the Crown Prince's sister, who also wanted to see the guest, the Princess of the Empire, Alatea Desire. Her appearance was flawless, except that her brother wasn't happy about this presence. He was surprised that she had snuck in through the whole crowd and dared to disrupt their conversation. Everyone thought the poor guest had vomited blood and wanted to call a doctor, except that it was actually a puddle of pudding due to the strong embrace. The woman noticed that it wasn't blood and said that a doctor wouldn't be needed. She decided to just help her friend through this awkward situation. To top it all off, the Emperor also came, followed by General Nemesius, the first hero of the Empire. Today at the celebration, everyone decided to gather around him. The girl was telling His Majesty that it was her fault the Count was bleeding because of her, because she couldn't help herself since she was so happy to see him. Her brother decided to apologize and be sure to punish the princess. But the Emperor decided against it. There was no way he could vomit blood just because the princess jumped him. He was attacked on his way to the palace, so it was most likely due to internal wounds and overexertion. In the end, no one wanted to hear that it was about something else entirely. I mean, they're so sensitive to the smell of blood, but they don't understand because the hall is drenched in the scent of perfume. He had to explain everything before this misunderstanding got out of hand. Since he kept refusing, one could assume it was due to the curse. And if it was a curse, even the Emperor's physician wouldn't be able to help. Since things had turned out like this, he decided to just pretend to feel sick and go home. He had already done everything he wanted to do and met with the Emperor, so he could leave. After that, he bowed and said that he had to go. Perhaps due to the stress, he really wasn't feeling well. The journey had turned out to be a total hassle. Only, unfortunately, the bowing actually made him feel nauseous. Everyone was again afraid for the young Count's condition, and so he was again rescued by his unloved brother, who held his hand. At such a moment, he thanked him for his help, but it was not so simple as that. With a single movement of his hand, he let go of his helpless relative. During the 8 years that he had been at war, his elder had been the object of endless hatred. Therefore, how dare he now pretend to be caring? Even the Crown Prince noticed that the Earl was very pale, so he really should go home. Perhaps he really did care a lot, although it didn't seem that way to the Lord himself. He might be kicked out, though it was usually considered offensive, but to him, it was also a show of politeness, and he decided to deflect. He really couldn't take it anymore. There were too many people present here that he didn't like. The others watched him leave. The Emperor was very lenient towards Dion Hart. Therefore, the Duke was unaware of how he dared to show such a disdainful attitude when many noble guests gathered at the banquet of the imperial family. The Emperor accepted his excuse. Will he was not feeling well? But could anyone after that reproach him for being ill-mannered? In the same way, he felt that Sir Cruel had been too generous to his brother. The man wanted to know that the lad was entirely on his side. After all, he just wanted to make sure the noble guests didn't get into a bad mood. It was understandable, and of course, he knew why they had come to see him. In the past, a descendant of the Hart family had asked this man to be his patron, an unfortunate man who had lost his family. When his younger brother killed their parents, he was going to be the best sword for him. If he just wanted to survive, he would have countless ways to do so. But out of all the possible options, this was the one he chose. The Duke wasn't stupid enough to kick the dog that came to his foot on its own, but he was curious as to why he was the one being asked. It was unknown if he was smart or stupid, but right now, he just wanted protection. And until then, he had always wondered what kind of protection he had told him about back then. But today, it was clear to him. He had spoken then of protection from Dion Hart. Someday, their long-standing confrontation would have to end, and each wanted to come out victorious. If that was what he meant, then they were on their way. The Emperor's loyal dog must be destroyed, and the Duke's dog would agree with everything. Honestly speaking, even though he was the Emperor's dog, it was far from the main reason why he should be eliminated. His trembling heart felt that he was the ultimate threat to the Empire. The man wanted to kill Dion Hart, who didn't care about him, at any cost. That was why he was respected for being so cold-blooded. The girl decided to escort her comrade to provide him with assistance. All he needed was a rest, but he smelled the odor of burning. Everything was perfectly fine when he left, but upon his return, his estate was burning in flames. Everyone around stood around and just watched the blazing fire. The noble knights had also gathered at this place, only it was unclear what they were doing here. Everything around them was incomprehensible. Even they were frightened by the occasion. He wished more than anything that it was just a dream, and he was actually dreaming, because he had been under a lot of stress lately. But a fever like this couldn't be a hallucination. The commander-in-chief started shouting to his soldiers and asking what they were doing here and why everything was burning. Since when did his house turn into a kennel with maddened dogs? Now he would show who was the boss and that he was to be obeyed. Only he had a bomb in his hand that he didn't want to get his hands on. It could explode right in his hands and kill him at the same moment. Any way you look at it, it is a bomb. He found nothing better to do than to toss it aside. If it was going to explode, it certainly wouldn't be in his hands. This thing was indeed powerful and created a huge explosion. As a result, his estate became even more in shambles. There was some chaos going on all around. What the devil were those rabid dogs doing near his house? He wanted to just come and rest in his bed after a long time and a bunch of unnecessary meetings. His subordinates kept calling him captain instead of count. They had wanted to explain to him what was going on here for a long time, but it had never worked out. The girl was already worried about her friend. A man appeared who really wanted to say that the boy was a hero, but at the same time, threw away the bomb that had arrived so unexpectedly. It seemed like everyone was beginning to realize who was responsible for all of these events. Because of one person, the whole area had turned into a blazing terrain. The army couldn't understand why anyone else had survived here, which meant that there were actually outsiders here. There were more and more questions and fewer answers. The air army actually came here and threw a bomb at a house, so they quickly defeated them. Except, how on earth did they end up near his house? Weren't the noble knights part of the imperial forces, or were they just kicked out because they were causing trouble? Right now, I was leaning more towards the second option. They pounced on their captain to improve their mood. They liked that he was worried about them. They may have messed up a little, but they weren't getting kicked out of anything. It was very rude of them to treat the Earl like that. They are the only ones who dare to treat him with such disrespect. They should have been reprimanded for that. In any case, those revolutionary bastards were at fault. It wasn't enough for them to attack his carriage. They also attacked the noble knights, subordinate to him. They seemed desperate to kill him, but what had he done to them? One of the enemies noticed that he had come within sight of his opponent. He decides to distract everyone to save his comrade. But if he wanted to get information about the Revolutionary Army, he needed to capture at least one alive. That's exactly what he was going to do. They didn't use the kindest methods, so, of course, it ended in a fight. It was Remember who took care of the case. The butler, who had a strong connection to the Count. This man was willing to do anything for his master. One could be sure that he was not an easy butler. He thought that his master was in grave danger. He didn't expect that the Count would catch the bomb and be able to strike back. It was now clear to this man what had happened in the Imperial Palace. It had only been half a day and his master looked tired. The commander had come to report that the Count had been attacked by the Revolutionary Army on his way to the palace. One would have thought that in addition to fatigue, he also had internal injuries. It was now clear why he had returned so quickly. He decided to take care of the rest, so they needed to make their way to the house in order to rest, while all of their enemies were being tied up. The obstacles to overthrowing the emperor are three people: the supreme commander of the 8 Years' War and the emperor's personal bodyguard, Nemesius. The man who stabilizes public opinion with outstanding political and managerial skills, Chancellor Ardar. The last vanguard commander of the 8 Years' War and the emperor's loyal dog, Dion Hart. He usually works in the shadows, appears unpredictably, and is very difficult to keep track of. This time went on a mission to capture monsters, but it is unknown what orders he was actually carrying out. That the revolution succeeds, Dion Hart must die. Even if he failed, the revolutionary forces would not give up. Therefore, the man called everyone the Emperor's mutts. Since the day they were dragged into the 8-Year War, none of them had raised their sword in the Emperor's name. That was why the man was so angry at those words. But he didn't say what they were doing it for, so he just said, "Stop bothering the Count," when he was already having a hard time. In fact, they were only doing all their deeds in the name of Dion Hart. Therefore, even now, that person would die because of it. The butler was upset that he now had even more cleaning to do. He needed to inform the Earl that his rabid dogs had mauled the man to death. In the alley, a little girl huddled in a corner. She hid her face in her lap and cried quietly. For a long time, she just wanted to eat. One day, she had been attacked by an angry man for touching his food. She was scared, but she hadn't eaten anything since that day. At this rate, she might die soon. People in the slums die all the time. It's unlikely that her death will surprise anyone. Is there anyone who would mourn her at all? But even here, she was noticed. The boy noticed that the girl was almost dead. He decided there was nothing he could do about it, then decided to give her his piece of bread this time. He found it outside the Church of Atonement. The little girl was curious to know because any food was worth its weight in gold to them, hard to get. The homeless man told her that people from the church would come to the slum and distribute bread and water. This conversation brought a kind smile to his face. The girl couldn't believe that someone could do such a thing for free. Maybe they put something in the bread, but he couldn't do that to her. His crippled neighbor ate it, and nothing happened to him. Although he'd eat anything if it was free. But why doesn't she believe him if it's true? The boy was thinking about her. She hadn't eaten anything in a week. Isn't the Church of the Atonement religious? You have to make a donation to be part of the congregation. He was starting to get angry that there was no way she would accept food. It was hard to believe they were being so kind and allowing poor children to survive. But if she didn't want to believe, he decided to go it alone. She would be the only one at a loss since she was such a non-believer. After all, she could just throw away the bread. Those words sounded hurtful to her. She called her friend and asked him to wait for her. After all, who cares if the bread and water are poisoned? Dying of poison or starvation, there was no difference as long as there was a chance to eat. It didn't matter if it was salvation or a curse. They would go there together to be there for the rest of their lives, even if it all didn't last long at all. It had been a week since he had returned to the Empire. The courtyard, previously engulfed in flames, had been practically cleaned up. He has also set aside a residence for those rabid dogs that showed up unannounced. All that remained was to wait for the Emperor to summon him and carefree enjoy life in the human world. Only, there was a backlog of paperwork to deal with. Someone requested to build another dam in the territory. I wonder who had the nerve. Was it the butler's request? Of course, the kid knew they were dealing with this temporarily, but they couldn't afford to be inattentive to such matters. Another dam wouldn't hurt. He quickly changed his shoes. After that incident, he couldn't act carefree with Remember. If he hadn't brought all those papers, he would have burned it to the ground and didn't worry about it anymore. It was noticeable that the guards were arguing outside, some accusing others of taking their rations and now spoiling the property. For others, it was too trifling a situation. As expected, the Imperial Noble Knights clearly don't get along. Even looking at them, one could tell which one was at fault. The crazy warriors were bullying and teasing the others. The Noble Knight clearly had nothing better to do. In the past, His Majesty often sent them on a mission, because there was no other way to deal with them. But since they were back under his command until they were given a job, it was their duty to train and wait for orders. In these moments, he missed the demon realm where he didn't have to do anything. It was worth wondering if his butler was tired. Perhaps he would need a vacation soon, but he asked not to write him off prematurely. Was it wrong to send the family knights back, even if they were assigned Imperial Knights? An unconventional practice, to avoid state treason. The Emperor wouldn't do it unless he had full confidence in him. Can this be considered as such? It seems he sent them back because he couldn't handle them, as if these rabid dogs could become malleable just from being under the Emperor's command. In any case, why were there so many papers piling up? He had handed over the Heart Manor to the Emperor after that day and was only dealing with it temporarily. So why was there so much paperwork here? If he really cared for it so much, why didn't he finally take these lands for himself? His Majesty had rewritten the title deed into the Lord's name again. Of course, he hadn't heard anything about this, and it left him in complete shock. The official document was somewhere among those many sheets. For some reason, he wanted to find a way to get the estate back. After all, he had even allowed the title of Earl to be given to him for the sake of protecting the border. He didn't need the Heart Manor, after all. Only bad memories were associated with it. More like the worst. He'd love to be just a baron. He would not leave it so easily, and now he must pay the Emperor a visit. But the Crown Prince and General Nemesius had already arrived. I wonder why they had come. Although everyone knew very well that it was the military chief who despised him. The men noticed the family portrait. Despite moving to a new estate, he still brought it here. Despite all the hatred, he couldn't leave the thing behind. The butler apologized for the wait. He would escort them to the drawing room. Even in the world of humans, there were some events that made life uncomfortable. The prince apologized for such a sudden visit, but he had something to tell the count. For this he had come such a long way. He had heard that the Honorable Lord had captured the Revolutionary Army alive when they ambushed him on the estate, and the princess listened attentively to the story. She was sullen and certain that the boy no longer wished to see her. She knew it, for all her efforts had been in vain. It was he who never left her thoughts. But her brother didn't think her efforts were worth anything at all. She wanted to be recognized as beautiful, and besides, she was a princess, and she had never seduced anyone before, so maybe inexperienced. But didn't want to cause so much trouble since his lover had vomited blood, though they said it wasn't for her, though she had thrown herself at him with all her might. She wanted to apologize and was going to meet him in person, but her older brother had forbidden it. She could do anything but that. Whether she came to him or invited him, it would be a scandal. So it was even better for her to use the scandal as an excuse to marry him. To put it mildly, she is a naive and downright stupid princess. She didn't really love this count. It's just an image she made up to fool the world. She might not love him, but for the sake of the imperial family, she could love him. She was actually quite cunning and didn't want to miss her opportunity. If the girl showed him how to think logically, her image as a foolish princess would arouse suspicion, though if she wanted to abdicate. Then her brother is all in favor. It's okay. They should stick together no matter what. The nobles are already debating who will inherit the throne. Anyway, as far as Dion was concerned, her plan hadn't failed yet. The girl has expressed her feelings towards him. If they are already well aware of it, they have eyes, they wouldn't dare to even think about him. And moreover, this is a great opportunity to associate such a talent with their family. He was sure she had her own reasons for this. After all, she had good intuition. So he stroked her head with a smile. He knew he was saying it over and over again, but still, if she wanted to, she could abdicate at any time. That would be the best option for him. Only, she kept persisting and asked him to find out what this boy really thought of her. That was a priority for her right now. Apparently, she'd drawn the wrong conclusions. This would lead to an extremely difficult situation. If the Emperor's precious talent was upset over such an incident, They came to make sure that the princess's behavior didn't upset him, but since they were already here, they decided to force him to join the emperor. They couldn't get rid of him. Dion Hart welcomed the future of the empire. Of course, he respected tradition and bowed whenever he met high-ranking people. He decided to ask what brought them here. They had a particularly important conversation, and the general had a real business to attend to. With how busy they all were, it was worth being brief. One could see the man looking at this boy with horror. Did he really want to pierce him with his gaze? The hatred was strong enough for him. Above all, they wanted to apologize. But for him, there was no need for that. It was therefore worthwhile to speak at once about the main thing. Now, it was about the banquet, during which the princess behaved extremely inappropriate, although the guy himself tried to forget about it as soon as possible. Of course, the prince already thought that for a while she would not do so. But it was an absolute trifle, and His Highness was glad that he was not hurt by it. Maybe he was a little confused, but it wasn't the first time for everything. Besides, there was a show of sympathy, and nothing to be angry about. In truth, he wanted to ask him for a favor. Finally, he got to the point. But what was the issue, since he was visiting him in person? He ended up asking to be his friend. The man wanted to get to know him better, but the man was always busy and it was terribly difficult to meet him. Had he really traveled all the way here just for this? The title of Crown Prince is too burdensome for him to do whatever he wants. He can't even pay a friendly visit to someone he wants to get close to. So he came here under the pretext that he wanted to apologize for what happened at the banquet, and he hoped the offer wasn't too embarrassing. But why ask a question to which the answer is already obvious? There was no way he was going to accept such a ridiculous offer. It would embarrass him. But all he could say was that he would be honored to be the Crown Prince's friend. He looks like he would kill him if he refused. Incredible loyalty. In that case, from that day on, they became friends. And the prince decided to do everything he could to make them closer. It was rather onerous. The heir was glad to be friends with someone the emperor considered his greatest treasure. Except for the noise, the talent, such news only made him sad. Although he realized that such an offer carried too much pressure, but he still did not refuse. The rumors were lying, and he has a good heart. Therefore, he would be genuinely happy if they could get closer. He asked to come see him whenever he came to the palace. They could spar, have tea, or have a chat. It seemed like different pictures for everyone. In the end, the Lord couldn't say anything because the prince had already gotten the answer he wanted, which meant it was already time for him to leave. He asked not to see him off because he still had some things to discuss with the general. His Highness hid behind the door and left without his commander. It wasn't the kind of company he wanted to be alone with, but there was no choice anymore. And the blonde man himself was already looking forward to seeing his new friend again. For him, the day had ended the way it should. Now Dion was alone with Nemesius. The awkwardness in this room was growing. Now what was he supposed to say to this formidable man? It had been a long time since they had last spoken face to face, and since he was busy, that man would not take up much of his time. In fact, His Majesty wanted them to hand over a captured soldier to the Revolutionary Army. They need to discover the location of their base to destroy. Of course, since he was the one who had captured him, he had every right to refuse. Now he was glad his interlocutor was quick to get to the point, for he too was not eager to chat with someone he didn't like, and he would gladly pass on from his prisoner. We'll send him away and go to rest. He was immediately taken to the enemy of the Empire. The Lord has ordered the prisoner bound so they can take him with them. They took him out of the cell. They were attacked by 3, but 2 were dead, though one of them died in the explosion. But nothing was reported about the cause of death of the second attacker. I wondered what the man was getting at, so he asked Dion Hart a direct question about exactly how this man really died. He'd never had a grudge for nothing. During the 8-year war, it was possible to observe him at close range. That was why he learned the truth about this boy and his sudden personality changes. The nobleman was first enlisted as an ordinary soldier after being assigned to a unit. It was impossible to ignore him. From this, he began to act ruthlessly on people, because of which he began to go insane. The child who was too weak to participate in combat chose cruelty as his method of survival. He had been holed up in his tent for a long time, but he needed to recover. He drank a lot and barely made it through the day. It was his method of survival, and no one would blame him for what had happened. But since he had made that decision, he would have to accept the guilt that would plague him until his last breath. A child who was tormented by guilt after every battle ended up splitting his personality into 2 parts, and sometimes didn't understand what was being said to him. He thought it was about his injuries and asked not to worry about him. Since he could change his character at will, it would be more correct to say his very essence was changing. At such moments, the little one had no idea at all what was being said to him. The insane side that puts up brutal bloodbaths, driven by survival instinct, and the normal one that behaves normally and controls the body in normal times. Here, they are the 2 entities. He seems to be severely fatigued and doesn't remember all the details, but since he survived without killing a single enemy, he must have been incredibly lucky, though he couldn't even resist the guilt the man must face, and chose the most horrible way to escape. And this time, the man decided to put it differently, and asked if he even remembered how the other man had died, wondering how much longer he would fool himself by turning a blind eye to his own actions. The general felt disgusted with him from the moment he stopped being human. And if he chose not to ignore it, unlike that time, then perhaps his attitude would change. As it happened, he wasn't present at that moment, so he didn't know the details. But from what the rabid dogs heard, tore him apart. Such was his answer. At what point did the man decide to leave? And since the Count was a busy man, so he shouldn't have seen his uninvited guests off. The man bowed politely and asked to be careful on the way back. Nemesius realized that nothing had changed since then. One could be sure that he was the one who had killed this man, most likely using this convenient identity of his to handle the case. The weakness of someone who put more responsibility on himself could lead to a more serious disaster. Therefore, Dion Hart was extremely dangerous. So, why would His Majesty keep this madman by his side? It remained a big mystery to the general. At some point, the boy fell asleep right in the chair, even though he intended to rest. The butler was waiting nearby at this time. In any case, it was necessary to find out how he was feeling. After all, he had given the man quite a scare when he lost consciousness. He had to call a doctor to take a look at him just in case. But now he had some rest and was fine. The doctor said that although his body is weak, it's mostly from stress and fatigue. At least once a day, his blood pressure goes up, so this old man had a suggestion. Why don't he take command over the knights in the monster extermination expedition? In principle, it wasn't a bad idea. They should calm down if they were tiring enough. Of course, he thought that the commander wouldn't mind. Since there were monsters in the vicinity of the manor, it was worth sending this army there. In the end, he asked for it to be done as soon as possible, and for all the annoying people to disappear from his sight so that he could breathe in a full breath again. Generally, this was only in his dreams. For some reason, he was dragged after everyone else. Now, he would have to fight the rest of the monsters. The girl informed the Count with a smile on her face that they were almost at the border. Everyone was excited for this trip, except him. Purely out of curiosity, he decided to ask why the Count had to go with them. But the others couldn't understand how he could miss such a fun task. Sure, he could get tired of sitting in his office all day long, but they know that he tries to show concern for them in the form of them going crazy from boredom. Doesn't he feel depressed since he hasn't seen blood in a while? He didn't like this talk, and he wanted to deny them to the last. But these rabid dogs persuaded him to go on the expedition with them, grabbing his legs. They whimpered, screaming like little children. He was part of the noble knights, so he can't send them alone to such an exciting place. Except for him, it didn't imply fun in the slightest. Except that the old man said he'd been annoying him all week and asked him to count it as a little vacation and a way to repay him for a job well done. They made faces like puppies because their master was too busy. It was breaking their hearts, and they were the only ones who could bail him out in this situation. He felt bad that the butler had set him up like that, but it was all about catching the bastard who had been chasing him all this time. Therefore, the old man would catch the rat. So now my lord needed to go and rest. There was a hidden meaning in every decision, and how was there to refuse? Of course, they had to catch the spy. All these constant problems annoyed him terribly and made him even more nervous. Everyone here was their own, so there was no need to be shy. They had heard that their commander had traveled alone on a monster extermination expedition and had come back happier than ever, but he was just resting in the Demon King's castle. They were madly wishing for their favorite boss to relieve stress under those conditions. There were quite a lot of monsters, and it could make one even more tired. The bravest warriors had already thrown themselves into battle, except that the chief himself didn't enjoy it at all. You could see it on his face. He thought they were absolute lunatics and missed the demon realm. At least, it was physically comfortable there. It was noticeable that Mistress Liana was tired as well, and she lacked any pleasure in doing so. She was doing all this for her comrade, a knight who was recommended by the personal emperor when he requested someone capable of taking bloody ghost knights under his command. She serves as the standard, being an excellent knight to her fingertips. Unlike those rabid dogs, Mistress could easily join any order of knighthood she wished. He was sorry she seemed along with him, and she asked if my lord would fight. But it was best to let these lunatics fight to their heart's content. They'll calm down quicker that way. It's impossible to get in with these lunatics at all. He wanted them all killed, so he wouldn't have to interfere. They seemed to enjoy his vacation the most, even though they kept calling him out for a fight. But in doing so, they didn't forget to argue amongst themselves. Angrily, he said that he would sort out his own vacation, so they had nothing to worry about. There was no way they could leave him alone. He had a feeling that if he interfered, everything might go to shit. He wasn't going to go, lest he show his true colors again. Out of nowhere, an arrow flew at my lord and slammed into his body. The girl was scared for her mentor. If he hadn't turned around, the shot would have landed in his throat. Maybe it was the neighboring state's fault, but there was no way they would have done this, not unless they wanted to start a war. Which means they're assassins, sent by someone who wants to kill him. So far, he's been hunted by people he doesn't understand. The boy asked his mistress to break off the arrow. He urgently needed to enter the fray to find those who were trying to kill him. He wanted the arrow removed as much as possible so that it could not be seen. Anger was boiling inside him now, and he was ready to fight. But if she did, he would suffer even more in removing the tip. But judging by his tone, he wasn't going to ask twice. The tip would penetrate deeper and deeper, so he would be in excruciating pain. Only right now, he didn't care about that. Orders had been given for the noble knights to get their medicine. Right now, they had a more important battle to fight. The attackers noticed the one they were shooting at. They now began to realize that it was the third hero of the Empire, Dion Hart. Judging by his white hair and the fact that he was out with the bloody ghostly knights, they had confirmed the identity. Only they were still trying to figure out who he was fighting there. This man thought that he was only destroying monsters, so what happened? He knew that this boy was the heroes of the Empire, but the injury he had just received looked serious. He seemed to have realized that it had only been 2 years since the end of the 8-year war. If they blamed those bastards for attacking their kingdom, they could probably get a large compensation from the Empire, all thanks to a scandalous famous boy. My lord had taken pills that temporarily shut down the mind. Only the girl knew that these drugs were forbidden, although it is simply not necessary to openly talk about the use. Now, it was time to join the fight with the assassins. This guy knew exactly how to piss off his second personality. He jumped off his horse beautifully, despite his deep wound. Right now, he wanted to kill his opponents and forget about it like a terrible dream. Of course, he was quick and attacked his opponent, ordering him to lie still until he did the same to his leg. A bloody battle ensued. Since he captured one alive, he sees no need for the rest, which meant that everyone else would face imminent death. There was chaos all around. The mad dogs began their vicious attacks on the humans again. There was nothing to stop them. The Count asked his mistress to make sure their hostage didn't die. Now he would go deal with the steel bad guys. The lady accepted the decree flawlessly. One of the knights of the army asked everyone to look at those crazy people. He was already covered in blood, but he wasn't the least bit tired of killing people. He thought that his enemy would die, even if he didn't cripple him yet. Perhaps he just didn't want to finish him off to the last man. Something inside him had changed. Except the little lord didn't like it. His cardinal rule was to kill a man until he let out his last breath. Since these rabid dogs were now knights, they thought they should fight like decent men. Except their captain decided to remind them what they're all here for. Since they had not yet taken the cure, they were considered very weak. If they couldn't even kill, none of them would survive. They had already forgotten the crazy side of their mentor. They didn't seem to have the talent to spare their enemies and still survive. Hadn't he said that time and time again? One had to put guilt aside and leave common sense behind exactly enough to distinguish between enemy and friend. Right now, they had to do whatever it took to survive, and their enemies had made the wrong choice of opponent. They were too greedy, so they came out for this fight. But it was too tempting an offer to refuse. Of course, it was all about the Empire's new hero, Cruel, who had set everything up. Even if they just wounded the enemy, they would be paid half of the reward. But he just added extra conditions in the assassination order and was sure that everything would go smoothly. But the order already said to kill Dion Hart. So why would he pay out of his own pocket to add such a condition? So he decided to take full responsibility. He probably despises his brother more than anyone, but sometimes he does such strange things. I don't know what he's trying to accomplish. He just wanted to see the end of this kid's life, pervaded by profanity, screams, and dirty tricks, an incredibly brutal battle. Here, the blood of the enemy flowed in rivers, the man standing in the center of it. The way his eyes shone as he hacked his enemies to pieces was reminiscent of a bloodthirsty beast. Only now did the attackers begin to realize that they shouldn't have gotten involved in this. They didn't fully realize how strong and dangerous their opponent was. How could anyone keep their sanity after encountering such lunatics? No wonder they are called bloody ghost knights instead of noble ones. Don't they look more like demons than humans? The look alone spoke for itself. It was obvious that they were only interested in survival. No one knew if he was blinded by money or maybe just an idiot. Or maybe it was all combined inside this man. Maybe he wasn't a fan of torture, so that would be glorious. Tell him who was behind it. He was kept alive just for that purpose. In the meantime, there was a complaint from the kingdom of Ilion. The Honorable Earl must have been destroying monsters at the borders, and others didn't like it. They claim that the battle they were forced into by the ambush at the castle walls was an attempted armed invasion. The Earl himself was wounded by an arrow in his left shoulder. It would be difficult for him to use his arm for the next month. This made the Crown Prince sad, and apparently, the Ilion Kingdom is demanding some sort of compensation for what happened. Apparently, they had decided that no one would get involved in a war. If they aren't strong physically, they should at least have brains. The heir assumed they hadn't been silent for too long. The aide was startled at the thought of his master. There was still the option of accusing the kingdom of an ambush to corner them, but the prince himself was adamant and told everyone to prepare for war. It had only been 2 years since the end of the last war, and it was costly, but this was too much of a respite for the prince. They could gain money and resources by embarking on a conquest. That was what they had done during the 8-year war, so there was no reason why it wouldn't work now. Even His Highness considered himself a tyrant and asked him not to oppose him in this matter. It was better to follow orders and stay alive. There was no way to escape. Especially, he was just thinking of conquering the continent, so these events were just in time. But if he wished to be a tyrant, he didn't have to give in to his duty. The emperor was obsessed with taking responsibility because of guilt. Conquering the continent had been his ultimate goal ever since he took the throne by killing his siblings. He's not going to be irresponsible with the current state of affairs, and his duties, which had become Candela's, were looming disaster. Only the aide didn't like the fact that he put the responsibility of his deeds above the people of the empire, which was definitely wrong with the hierarchy. If the disaster couldn't be avoided, he hoped it wouldn't reach the Empire. A budget had to be worked out in secret, and the Chancellor was no doubt scrambling on the fly. Then it was time for them to get to work too. He asked the general if he had heard of the Church of Atonement. It was a sect that had been increasing its numbers in the slums as chaos raged in the country, residents turning to religion to calm their nerves. But the Church of Redemption had become too influential. It would be better to eliminate any threat before war. Wondering who could take care of that. Of course, he had to put the Count in charge of the matter since he had made this mess, though he had no intentions of punishing him. Since he only needs to handle a few rappers, even though he's injured, surely he could take care of it. The great commander objected to it because the man was dangerous. Nemesius had always felt that way about Dion Hart, and for good reason. He definitely didn't like him. It was because of his ruthless approach to destroying his enemies. Of course, the man was sure it was just his way of survival, but the Lord had created two separate identities for himself. It was time to tell him about it. The bastard's psyche was as fragile as a sandcastle. He couldn't even take on the weight of his own responsibility, which the Emperor said would happen if his psyche broke. Once he came to terms with reality, the wall he himself had erected would crumble to pieces. Only His Majesty didn't care at all. It turns out the man was aware of all this. This is the decision that the boy must make. Even if something happens through his fault, the responsibility for it will be on him. The general couldn't believe his words. After all, having such a helper would eventually affect the owner as well. He might end up sharing this burden of responsibility with his subordinate. Eventually, the king got tired of listening to all these lectures. He perfectly accepted his fate and responsibility for his actions, so he wouldn't do anything about it. It was time to recognize that he had become a tyrant. But he could be a fine ruler for those he held dear. He chose to forgive the subordinate's disrespect, as he was not so ignorant that he could not graciously forgive a loyalist's mistake. Not that he didn't understand his concerns, but there was no need to worry. He would never leave a dangerous person around for no reason. Absolutely pure feelings of hatred, rage, and a desire to kill. He had built up his anger towards his family over the 8 years he had been able to survive, after being sent off to war at a young age. And when his merit was finally recognized, and he was brought before the Emperor, the only thing he asked for was revenge on his family. Probably a nuisance to the county, having staged a coup to claim the throne, he has no reason to reject it. Is he really so valuable that the Emperor would allow him to destroy an illustrious family? But if a man was going to use it as a sword, he should refine it as much as possible to temper it. The order was to fight the Demon King, being a fellow hero. The result was amazing. He managed to collect the dead hero's corpse, and even after that, he still had the same feelings. With such an achievement, everyone should have recognized him as a hero, even if he didn't possess that fragment. But what is fate? The king let him deal with Hart County. That night, Cruel Heart returned home late, as a witness to his brother killing the people back home, but he himself managed to survive. He finally accepted that, and it became a great card to play against Dion Hart. Whatever the reason, he killed his own family. And the only building he had left was his brother. Well, to complete this he will certainly need the Emperor, while Cruel serves Duke Illustra to guarantee his own salvation. The two brothers are at each other's throats, so as long as Cruel Heart is alive, Dion Hart will remain on the Emperor's side. In the end, he was completely consumed by the madness, and a little more of his rage. It was all about survival, and he didn't have to remember. Even if it stayed in his head, he just needed it. His inner voice was making him forget all his bad deeds. Self-suggestion, in the form that he hadn't really done anything. And upon waking up, he believed it was just a dream. Then he arrived at the border, and an assassin shot him while he was destroying monsters. That's what he thought to himself, but his guard reported that they had arrived at his estate. He didn't notice when they returned. By the time he regained consciousness, it was all over. And naturally, he didn't remember anything afterward. If it wasn't for the shoulder wound, he would still think that everything that happened earlier was a dream. Upon arrival, he immediately inquired where his butler was. The man had expected this to some extent, but was still surprised to find out who the spy was. Now it remained to recognize the one behind it all, except that the rat himself was very resistant. Even the man realized that he was now talking to an unusual butler. Up until now, he had been trying to break free from his shackles. In the end, Remember informed his master that he wanted to find out everything, but their hostage had died. It was unclear whether his words could be trusted. Well, he wasn't the only one to get information from, so one could assume it wasn't that important. By this time, his assistant reported that the Count had returned to the manor. It was necessary to remove the body before anyone saw it. They didn't plan to linger. They needed to follow that guy to find out who had been communicating with the man, as well as who was behind all of this, and using the butler's position to terminate his employment contract. His methods were frightening. When the commander was already in his room, his employee approached him and greeted him cheerfully. Of course, he had heard that his master had been wounded. It was worth it to see if he was all right. The wound was in his left shoulder, so it wouldn't affect his routine much. What a relief for him, because the paperwork kept piling up. The boy noticed that his old man was also wounded because he smelled blood. After all, he had just grabbed the spy. He must have gotten blood splattered on him. So he started looking at his hands. He had to apologize because he was trying to keep him alive, but there was an accident. The guy ended up accepting it. Even he didn't know what kind of butler he was. It was known that he came from a small state in the central continent. The man had heard that his count had encountered an assassin. Perhaps he had managed to learn something, but that enemy was also dead, so there was no way to find out anything. Although he didn't really remember anything, but judging from the situation, he was sure that was the case. Since my lord had also failed, it probably means that the person behind everything should not be underestimated. That would narrow it down to the revolutionary army of an enemy state, or the head of the nobility, the Duke of Elistre. And it seems this duke was the most likely option. Such attacks on his part could not be overlooked. At any rate, this was not an enemy he could handle alone. So why wouldn't he ask for the emperor's help? This butler was good indeed, but if he had overstepped his bounds, he apologized. But the boy was still going to pay the emperor a visit and get the estate back, so he might as well deal with that before he got into something else. Like getting rid of the bloody ghost knights or quitting his job. He was determined to get a peaceful, quiet life as soon as possible. But at this time, His Majesty was holding a private meeting with Elistre. He would have to wait a little longer, though he thought he would be able to see His Majesty right away. But his plans had been displaced, and he would have to wait some more. While he was wondering where to pass the time, the emperor's children were already waiting for him here. The girl wanted her brother to let her go before she jumped on the guest again. It was urgent to apologize to the count for this girl's behavior. She thought it was all right, though, and Dion Hart welcomed the future of the empire, that he obligingly bowed according to the rules of noble society. But the prince had already stopped that boy, for there was no need for these formalities. Weren't they friends now? And of course, he had heard that he needed to wait, so they could spend time together. If he had known he would bump into them, he would have come back later. Though now they were having tea together, and there was nothing to be done about it. Since he liked the tea, the prince decided to ask for more to be made, but there were still cookies on the table, so it was suggested that he try them. It was best not to think about anything. All his time would have to bear with this company for a while, and he would go about his business. Of course, His Highness heard that the Earl was injured when he was on the expedition. He should be more careful because of the curse that weakened his body. Why on earth was he so actively participating in destroying monsters? He should be more careful, after all. He should serve His Majesty for many years. But he was going to abandon his duties and enjoy an idle life. Although he wasn't going to become an emperor, and this caused a huge shock to the Lord. The situation was awkward for the two of them. Right now, he was the crown prince because there was nowhere to go, but since he and the emperor were only 8 years apart, shouldn't he be preparing to retire when the head retired? But here was a boy not interested in politics at all, and he didn't want to hear it. But if this person took the head's place, then it would mean that something happened to His Majesty, so he hoped it would never happen. These children already know His Majesty was like a sibling to them, so they only wished him happiness. Well, the princess thought a little differently. Yes, of course, he was aware of how much the crown prince and princess respected their uncle the emperor, the current emperor, and the previous 9th prince. If one remembered that he had killed all of his siblings, along with their children, it would be hard to explain the existence of these people. Not to say that they don't despise him, but they have their own reasons. The first prince, the father of the crown prince and princess. He was kind, unlike most of the other imperial personages, even to the 9th prince, who had no hope of claiming the throne. Every day until his death, he and his children would visit the 9th prince. That was why they treasured each other like family. They were closer than family. It is said that if the first prince were alive, the 9th prince would never have mastered the sword. They were worried about His Majesty carrying everything on his shoulders, so they asked them to take good care of him. But why did they burden the Earl with such words, although they were sure that he would still do his duty no matter what? After all this talk, he asked to go to the restroom. Sitting there and hearing about what he had to do was completely unbearable. The couple was sure the boy had run away from them. It was safe to assume that this conversation was too much for him to bear. The prince was apologizing, but he was actually being honest. Something lurks behind the deceptively still surface of the water, and swords are always pointed at their uncle the emperor. But if he continues like this, he will never be able to take the throne of the emperor. It would help to get him the position of supreme ruler because the nobles are starting to complain. So they wanted to discipline the tyrant. In 2 years, their satisfaction has turned into appeasement with a hidden threat. They don't know when they can take action to force them to reveal their cards, so it would be better to prepare a solution in advance. The empire needs someone who is absolutely on his side. Since Dion Hart was a prominent figure, they could ask for more if he sided with them. Why not try to groom him? He hoped that the Honorable Earl would be a loyal ally to His Majesty. An ally so bright that no matter what would get in the way of the Emperor's service, even if it was royalty, he would still be able to kill them without a doubt. Only there was no way he could find the restroom due to the fact that after meeting with the Emperor he immediately leaves. The Lord is not oriented in this palace at all. Ahead stood a frightened man-lord, is used to people running away at the sight of him. But now was not the right time, he could not stand it anymore. One would have to be nice and smile, and after that ask where the place he needed to go to was. He just wanted to know his way to the restroom, but he was already about to be killed along the way. Of course, the attacker didn't succeed and just fell with all the papers and the knife on the floor. He was now definitely caught after so many failed attempts. He finally managed to steal the document. But now he's caught red-handed by this Earl Dion Hart. Though the boy didn't really need anything. His chances of staying alive were slim, even if he ran, so must attack while he least expected it on his part. But that's when Cruel Heart entered the fray. The hero grabbed his foe by the neck and lifted him to the top. And this time his older brother did everything, and appeared, as always, unexpectedly. This situation was interesting. The question was looming. What was he doing here? It was time to recognize that he was his main enemy and was following him around. Well, what were the papers in the hands of this enemy, which until now had been in the hands of the hero? Of course, the Duke himself decided to pick up the papers here. It seems that they were rather important documents for the Imperial Palace. He had just seen the Emperor, but he didn't expect to run into the Count like this. A conversation ensued between the two of them. Of course, the man asked what the young lord was doing here, though he didn't think he had to report everything to him. While they were waiting, they managed to catch a spy in the palace. But wouldn't the Emperor fulfill the boy's every whim after something like that? Wasn't anyone going to take his glory? Even if Cruel San didn't approach, Daeon would have easily caught the spy himself. But it wasn't like that. Just then, the heirs who were recently having tea appeared. They were worried since their friend hadn't returned, but they saw that something strange had happened here. Of course, the prince immediately jumped up to the boy and noticed the blood on his face. As a loyal comrade, he was scared for his well-being. Immediately, there were shouts for someone to urgently call the court physician. Of course, there was nothing wrong with him. His body began to emit blood again. The Count had been wounded while apprehending the spy. It's clear that the weapon might have been smeared with poison. Everyone began to speculate on the subject. No one wanted to let this boy go for nothing. Everyone thought that right now, he was between life and death. And the royal physician was already running away. He was calling for His Majesty, and heard that there was a patient here. But the doctor felt uneasy when he realized that it was a case with this lord again. He was sick of treating him for something he didn't understand. During the last banquet, the doctor had come running when he heard that the Earl needed emergency treatment. But he was already gone. There were only high-ranking officials around. This made him feel frightened. Those creepy high-ranking officials are always so concerned about his health, so perhaps he should stop crippling himself all the time. He was scared to answer questions about his health. The prince was angry because his friend had vomited a huge amount of blood. Perhaps he had gotten a bad checkup, and the lord himself realized that at this rate, he would increase the number of enemies. Then the general came over and suggested that it was all because of the Demon King's curse. There were more and more people around. He came here to report that His Majesty had summoned the Honorable Earl. It would be better for some servant to do it for him. Why go out in person? But did His Majesty expect him? Then he should go. And of course he was grateful to His Highness for thinking of him, but next time, he shouldn't worry so much. He probably thinks that there is no need to make others worry since there is no way to free him from the curse. How can you continue to treat him with incomprehension when he's like this? Courteous. This is very unfortunate. The Duke, sitting in his carriage, realized that the documents were estimates of expenses for the war period. And though he informed him that there would be no war in the near future, he should be careful. For the sake of accomplishing his own goals, this time he would be especially helpful in his plans. The Emperor noticed that the boy did not look well, but he had also heard that he had caught a spy and may have been badly wounded. He was fine, though he was thrown into a cold sweat, but that was most likely due to a lot of pressure from outside. Of course, the man asked not to hide his condition from him. After all, he was the most precious talent in the Empire. But surprisingly, he really was fine. In fact, he just really needed to go to the bathroom. He should have gone before coming here, but unfortunately, he couldn't because of others. He had to tell the Emperor that he had come here, about Hart Manor, but the men beat him to it and told him that if he was going to return it, or anything like that, he would immediately refuse. He also had questions about the knights, the toilet, and of course his retirement, only that was out of the question, even if he needed rest. But if he would fulfill one request of the Emperor, then he would fulfill another of his wishes. This was a tempting offer. It was about the Church of Redemption. It's a fairly common sect in the slums, and the man wanted the boy to destroy it, though he was already tired of it, and could just refuse him despite wanting to. But this time too, His Majesty was ahead of him. It was also the task he had given to the Duke and his older brother, and if they could handle it faster, then he would fulfill their wishes. Of course, he agreed. Of course, he fell for the ruse. After all, no one knows what his brother might wish for, and he must stop it at all costs. But in reality, the Duke himself had asked for the Church of Redemption to be eliminated. But the man couldn't let things go, according to his designs. Then, choosing between the two brothers, he would fulfill the wish of the one who would accomplish the task first. If he offered a reward, would it not be better to give it to his favorite, who was on the Emperor's side? Now he would complete the task first, no matter what. Since things had turned out like this, he would definitely defeat that bastard. Recently, the master had only been brought the same tea all the time. He had noticed this, and he thought it was rather strange. The butler felt that his earl enjoyed it so much, especially since it was given to him by the prince. But after that incident, he really wanted to go to the restroom every time because of that tea. Also, one couldn't forget to drink the elixir after everything. It was mandatory. Since it was prescribed by the imperial physician, it must be good for his health, especially since it had been tested as well. But he didn't worry about it. He just didn't like drinking bitter things. For this occasion, the man had just prepared some sweets. A girl came into the hall and informed their leader that she had returned. She was just about to investigate and report back. Perhaps she should have been able to find out something about the Church of Atonement. It seemed to be a pseudo-cult, expanding its influence mainly in the slums. It was said that they offered people water and bread absolutely free, thus gathering believers. Unlike other cults, this one does not require faith or offerings. She filed a document that summarizes all the information. But they do spread the word about faith in the atonements. It was too vague a concept. By this, they were suspicious for many reasons. The food distribution must have cost a fortune. They were definitely sponsored by a few nobles. However, considering the scale of the activity even for the aristocracy, it could be onerous sums. But they didn't need money or to be put on a pedestal as a religious leader. Then what was their real purpose? Finishing his tea, the boy realized he had a need again. First, he would go to the restroom, and then he would already be thinking about everything. The commander now realized that her mentor was going to investigate this himself. Instead of ordering his subordinates around, he was taking the initiative. This made her very happy. Since this was a dangerous mission, she decided to accompany the commander, and after all, he just wanted to get up and go to the bathroom, and as usual, he was misunderstood. But what she really wanted was to go with him to the Church of Atonement. They found themselves on the path leading to the main building. From now on, he would have to hide his true identity. The butler had prepared a tattered robe for him. They didn't even give him time to prepare, and strangely enough, he didn't even have time to go to the bathroom because the girl dragged him here in joy. Better to step back now than go somewhere else. He told the mistress that he would be back soon and asked to wait for her here. He didn't want to make the same mistake again and began to hide in the slums. The girl had no time to think and wanted her master to confirm everything, but he had already disappeared and she had no time to find him. She was scared because he didn't look good where he went alone, especially he had a sickly look. Maybe it was because of the Demon King's curse. Well, after everything, the boy was really relieved, which gave him joy in this life. Thank goodness, someone from the private house let him use the restroom, and he was so afraid that the mistress would go after him. Cruel was in the same place. It seems the lad had also decided not to wait long and go on a mission as soon as possible. And they met, as always. Unfortunately, this body vomited blood even from mere surprise. Such an unexpected moment upon meeting his brother made him feel sick, although he didn't want to show his weakness in front of that bastard. Of course, the elder thought that he and his injured arm wouldn't sit still. He was referring to the arm that the spy had injured him, but to him, it was a small injury that he barely felt. He never remembered it. So that was how he knew which place he had been wounded by the assassin during the monster enslavement. That led him to different thoughts. Cruel was sure that one was wounded, yet he still managed to move like that. It looked like they hadn't done their job properly. Now, it was starting to make sense. It was his older brother who had sent those assassins, so now he had to kill him right now. Suddenly, to top it all off, the lady appeared, apologizing because she was looking for her count due to excitement. He almost lost his mind, and the girl ran to immediately intercede for her lord. He vomited blood. She doesn't deserve her knighthood. How could she let him go alone, when he was so unwilling to bother them with his health? And in such a state, he was still able to fight off the Empire's new hero. Cruel himself recognized the commander of the knights, under Dion. She wanted to apologize a little later, and deal with this man first, but the count stopped her with a single motion of his hand. He motioned for the lady to step aside. Of course, he thought it would be great if she killed him for him. However, he was recognized as a hero of the Empire. Lyanna was at a disadvantage. After that, Cruel asked about whether they wanted to infiltrate the Church of Redemption. But the boy wasn't going to answer, as he didn't seem like he would continue the fight. They had to separate, even though he had lost his mind, for a while. His brother decided to remind him that it was too dangerous to get involved. Only they weren't in the right relationship to talk about such a thing. How did the man who tried to kill him suddenly care? With anger, he muttered words of gratitude. He thought he was a complete idiot who just needed to live the rest of his life in peace, though the hero himself thought his weak body was a curse. Of course, he wondered how long he had left to live. He didn't know the details. Surely it wouldn't last too long. If it lasted until he died, he could end it all. Then he started slathering himself in mud. But will the girl stand like that? She is noble from head to toe, regardless of how she looks. She knew she had to do it, but she didn't seem to like being covered in dirt. Since the lady was born a noblewoman, she had never done anything like that. After all, how could she leave him alone? He remembered that she had promised never to leave him, but it seemed that it was all a lie. Those words made her furious, for she couldn't break her knightly promise, so now she would take the ground and smear it. She really didn't like it, but it couldn't be helped. If they were going to act, they should look like they came from the slums. Only his brother didn't forget to suggest putting mud on his hair as well. He was annoyed that he was shoving more of his advice in. One could be sure he was here for the same reason they were, probably also tasked with eliminating the Church of Redemption. It was impossible to procrastinate lest they run into him again on this mission. He ended up asking Lyanna to hide his sword and leave. He decided to go first. But unfortunately, he didn't have time to wait. In the end, after he got caught up when he was running in the church, his foot caught the ground and he somersaulted towards the girl who was a minister. Now he wanted to die just there. The woman was very surprised at this unexpected approach and decided to ask if the stranger was all right. She decided that he had been starving for too long, so he was not on his feet. He must have been injured. He had to be helped to get up. A story was made up that because of the chronic illness he was born with, he was in this condition, but it wasn't contagious. He was invited to come inside. He really is incredible. Played up a great performance to get himself in as naturally as possible. He was indistinguishable from a poor man. One had to follow his example. Except the lady was refused, apologizing because they had too many worshippers today.